The sky over Nebraska hung low that November afternoon, bruised purple and heavy with snow that had not yet fallen. It was the kind of cold that settled into the bones before it ever touched the skin, the kind that made men think twice about mercy. Thomas Wade sat atop his gelding on the ridge above Sand Hollow, watching the land spread out beneath him in shades of white and gray. 3 years he had worked this territory. 3 years of sweat and silence, of building something from nothing with his own two hands. The deed to 80 acres lay folded in his coat pocket, paid for in blood and solitude. 6 head of cattle sold that morning for $240, enough to see him through winter, enough to keep a man alive. He should have ridden on, should have turned Duke toward home and the warm cabin waiting there. But something in the valley below caught his eye and held it. A woman. She moved across the snow-covered field like a figure from a nightmare, bent double under weight that should have broken her. Behind her, something large dragged through the white powder wrapped in canvas that had once been brown, but was now stained dark with old blood. 6 children followed in her wake, small shadows against the endless white. They moved in silence, a funeral procession, without music or mourners. Thomas narrowed his eyes. The thing she dragged was a body, a man's body, judging by the size. Her husband, most likely, dead and frozen and being hauled across frozen ground by a woman who looked like she weighed less than the corpse she pulled. His hand tightened on the reins. Duke shifted beneath him, sensing his tension. In the distance, he could see their destination. A half-collapsed cabin window stuffed with rags, roof sagging under the weight of neglect. No smoke rose from the chimney, no firewood stacked against the coming storms. This was not survival. This was the slow march toward death. The oldest boy, maybe 10 or 11, carried an axe that seemed too heavy for his thin arms. He walked beside his mother, his small frame, a pathetic shield against the world. The other children huddled together barefoot in the snow. One of them was coughing, the sound carrying across the empty space between them. Thomas felt something twist in his chest, a pain he had thought long buried. 3 years ago, he had dug 2 graves under a Missouri oak tree, one large one heartbreakingly small. He had buried his wife Margaret with their daughter Rose cradled in her arms, both taken by cholera in the space of 18 hours. He remembered the weight of the shovel in his hands, the sound of dirt hitting wood, the way Margaret's last words had echoed in the silence. Promise me, take care of Rose. He had promised, and he had failed. When the graves were filled and the prayers were said, Thomas had burned his house to the ground. He had walked away from Missouri with nothing but his horse, his tools, and a hole in his chest where his heart used to be. West, always west, running from the ghost that followed him. Now, 3 years later, looking down at this woman and her 6 children, he felt those ghosts stirring again. He could ride on, should ride on. This was not his burden to carry. But even as the thought formed, Duke was already turning down the slope. Thomas Wade had spent 3 years learning how to live alone. He was about to learn if he remembered how to live with others. The woman heard him coming. She stopped dragging the body and straightened slowly, one hand pressed to the small of her back. Her face was a mask of exhaustion and something harder. Suspicion, fear, the wariness of prey that has learned to expect predators. Thomas stopped his horse 50 feet away, close enough to speak, far enough to show he meant no immediate threat. The boy with the axe stepped forward, placing himself between Thomas and his mother. The weapon shook in his small hands, but he held it steady enough. Brave kid, foolish, but brave. Ma'am, Thomas kept his voice low and even, the tone he used with spooked horses. Looks like you could use some help. We don't need help. Her voice was hoarse, raw from cold or crying or both. But there was iron in it, pride that poverty had not yet broken. Thomas nodded once. His eyes moved past her to the wrapped body, then to the ruined cabin in the distance. No smoke, no light, no life. Your husband, dead 3 weeks, no emotion, just fact. You planning to bury him? Ground's too frozen, can't dig. Thomas looked at the children again. Really looked. The thin faces, the hollow eyes, the way they swayed slightly as if standing upright required more strength than they possessed. The baby in the woman's arms was ominously quiet. You have food. Enough. It was a lie. He could see it in the way her jaw clenched, in the desperate thinness of her children. Ma'am, with respect, you don't have enough for 7 people to make it through winter. That's not your concern. No, Thomas agreed. It's not. He should have left it there. Should have tipped his hat and ridden away. But the boy was staring at him now, and something in those eyes reminded Thomas of Rose. The same shape, the same desperate hope, trying to hide behind false courage. I have a cabin, Thomas heard himself say. 2 miles north, room enough, food enough. You and your children could stay the winter. The woman's eyes narrowed. In exchange for what? The question hit him like a slap, but he understood it. A widow alone learned quickly that nothing came free. Nothing, just work, cooking, cleaning, fair trade for shelter and food. I don't do that kind of work. Thomas felt heat rise in his face. I'm not asking for that kind of work. I'm offering shelter, ma'am. Nothing more. Men always want more. I'm not other men. She laughed a bitter sound without humor. That's what they all say. The boy stepped closer, the axe raised slightly. What do you want with us, mister? Thomas looked down at the child, saw the fear beneath the bravado, saw a boy trying to be a man because no man had remained to show him how. He dismounted slowly, keeping his hands visible. When he knelt, he put himself at eye level with the boy. 3 years ago, I had a wife. Her name was Margaret. I had a daughter. Her name was Rose. They died of cholera in Missouri. I buried them myself because there was no one else to do it. His voice was steady, but his hands shook slightly. I came west to start over. Built a cabin, bought land, tried to forget, but I can't. Every day I wake up alone and remember what I lost. He paused, meeting the boy's eyes. Yesterday I saw your mother in town. I saw her trying to buy flour with coins that weren't enough. I saw people turn away. And I rode home and I lay awake all night thinking about what happens when winter comes and you have nothing. I'm not here because I'm a good man. I'm here because I can't watch another family die when I have the means to prevent it. The boy's grip on the axe loosened slightly. You lost your little girl. I did. How old was she? 3. The boy's lower lip trembled. My sister is 3. Lucy, she's cold all the time now. Thomas nodded. He understood. He stood slowly looking at the woman. Ma'am, I know you have no reason to trust me. I know every instinct tells you to refuse. But your children are dying. You know it. I know it. And I'm offering you a way to save them. You can walk away from my offer and I'll respect that choice. But I won't stand by and watch them freeze or starve when I have a warm house and food to spare. The woman stared at him for a long moment. Her jaw worked, grinding words she would not speak. Then she looked down at the bundle in her arms. The baby. Thomas saw her face change, saw fear break through the armor of pride. Grace, her voice cracked on the name. The baby, she's sick. She stopped crying this morning. How long has she been sick? A week, maybe more. Fever and cough. I have no medicine, no money for a doctor. Thomas felt ice settle in his stomach. He had heard that silence before, the terrible quiet that preceded death. Let me see her. The woman hesitated, then slowly unwrapped the bundle. The baby inside was far too small for 10 months old. Her skin was pale, tinged with blue around the lips. Her breathing was shallow and rapid. As Thomas watched, her tiny chest stuttered, caught, and stopped. She's not breathing. The woman's voice rose in panic. Grace, Grace. Thomas moved without thinking. He took the baby from her arms, his large hands cradling the tiny body. He turned her over, supporting her head, and struck her back sharply between the shoulder blades. Once, twice, nothing. He flipped her back over, tilted her head back, pinched her tiny nose, and breathed into her mouth. One small puff, then another. The world narrowed to this moment, this child, this chance to do what he had failed to do 3 years ago. Please, not again. Please, he breathed again. Pressed gently on her chest, breathed. The baby coughed, a weak, wet sound. Then she gasped and air rushed into her lungs. She began to cry, a thin wail that was the most beautiful sound Thomas had ever heard. He held her against his chest, feeling her breathe, feeling her live. His hands were shaking. His eyes burned. Behind him, the woman sobbed openly. The children crowded close, reaching for their sister. Thomas carefully handed the baby back to her mother. Their eyes met, and in that moment, something passed between them. An understanding. A debt created and acknowledged. She needs a doctor. Thomas's voice was rough. Now, she has pneumonia. Maybe worse. Without treatment, she won't last the week. I told you, I have no money. I have money. Thomas stood, brushed snow from his knees. The town is 2 hours by wagon. Dr. Morrison will see her. I'll pay. Why? The question came out broken. Why would you do this? Thomas looked at her. At this woman who had dragged a corpse through snow rather than ask for help. At these children who stood silent in the cold because they had learned that crying changed nothing. Because 3 years ago I held my daughter while she died. I held her and I couldn't save her. I couldn't do anything but watch. His throat tightened. Just now I held yours and she lived. And I'll be damned if I let that slip away because of pride or fear or money. He walked to his horse, pulled himself into the saddle, looked down at them. My wagon is at my cabin, 2 miles north. I'll bring it here, load your family, and take you to town. After the doctor sees your baby, you can decide. Come home with me or go back to your cabin. Your choice. But I'm not leaving without knowing that child will live. He turned Duke and rode away before she could argue. Behind him, Sarah Brennan stood in the snow holding her crying baby surrounded by her silent children. She looked at the body of her dead husband, at the ruined cabin, at the impossibility of surviving what was coming. Then she looked at the retreating figure of Thomas Wade, and for the first time in 3 weeks, she let herself feel something other than despair. Hope, fragile and terrifying, but hope nonetheless. An hour later, Thomas returned with his wagon. It was a sturdy farm wagon built for hauling timber and supplies, but today it carried blankets and a canvas cover to keep out the wind. He had stoked the fire in his cabin, high before leaving heating stones that now lay wrapped in cloth in the wagon bed. Warmth, the most precious commodity in winter. Sarah had moved her husband's body to the small smokehouse behind the cabin. She said nothing about it, and Thomas did not ask. Some burials had to wait for spring. The children climbed into the wagon without speaking. They moved with the practiced efficiency of those who had learned not to waste energy on unnecessary motion. Thomas noted how they positioned themselves. The oldest boy, Samuel, sat near the back, watching Thomas with wary eyes. The 2 girls, Emma and Lucy, held the smaller children between them for warmth. Daniel, the 7-year-old, kept his hand on a small knife at his belt. Not a weapon, a tool, but held like a weapon nonetheless. Sarah climbed up last, cradling Grace against her chest. She sat on the bench beside Thomas but kept as much distance between them as the narrow seat allowed. Thomas flicked the reins and the horses began to move. They rode in silence for the first mile. The only sounds were the creak of wheels on frozen ground and the labored breathing of the baby. Thomas kept the horses at a steady walk, fast enough to make progress, slow enough not to jostle the sick child. The landscape around them was bleak. Winter had stripped the land to its bones. Bare cottonwoods stood like sentinels along the frozen creek beds. Prairie grass, once golden, now lay flattened and gray beneath the snow. In the distance, the mountains rose dark against the pale sky, their peaks already white with the early storms. This was hard country. It took everything from those who tried to tame it and gave nothing back but the chance to try again tomorrow. Thomas had learned that lesson in blood and hunger. He wondered what this woman had paid to learn it. Finally, Sarah spoke. Her voice was quiet, barely audible over the wind. If I come to your house and you hurt me or my children, I'll kill you. Thomas did not turn to look at her. I know. I mean it. I've killed before. Your husband, she flinched as if struck. No, but I've thought about it. Toward the end, when the drink made him mean, I thought about it plenty. I don't drink. All men drink. Not all, not anymore. Thomas paused. My father drank. Beat my mother until the day she died. I swore I'd never be like him, so I don't drink. Not ever. Sarah was quiet for a moment. How did your wife die? Really, Bo? Cholera, like I said, Missouri summer of '68. The whole town got sick. Margaret first, then arose. I tried everything, kept them cool, made them drink water, prayed until my knees bled. They died anyway. You blame yourself. It was not a question. Every day. You shouldn't. Disease doesn't care about blame. Knowing that doesn't make it easier. They lapsed into silence again. But it was a different silence now. Not the silence of strangers, the silence of 2 people who understood loss. The town of Sand Hollow appeared on the horizon as the sun began its descent. It was a small settlement, maybe 300 souls built around a crossroads, and sustained by the ranches scattered across the valley. One main street, a dozen buildings, a church with a steeple that leaned slightly to the left as if the wind had been pushing it for years and was slowly winning. Doc Morrison's office was a small building attached to his home painted white with a red cross on the door. Light showed in the windows. Thomas pulled the wagon to a stop and climbed down. "Wait here." He reached up to help Sarah down, but she ignored his hand and climbed down herself. "I'm coming in." Thomas nodded. He should have expected that. She was not the kind of woman who let others decide her child's fate. Inside the office was warm and smelled of carbolic acid and tobacco. Doc Morrison sat at his desk writing in a ledger. He was a lean man in his late 60s with silver hair and hands that still held steady despite his age. He had been an army surgeon during the war, had seen things that would break lesser men, and had come west to forget. Like Thomas, he was running from ghosts. He looked up as they entered, and his eyes went immediately to the baby in Sarah's arms. "Thomas," he stood moving around the desk. "What have we got here?" "Baby, 10 months old, pneumonia, I think. Stopped breathing about 2 hours ago. I got her started again, but she needs help." Doc Morrison took the baby without hesitation, laid her on the examination table, and began unwrapping her. His face remained neutral, but Thomas saw the tightening around his eyes. "How long has she been sick?" "A week," Sarah said. "Maybe longer. I couldn't afford medicine." "What are her symptoms?" "Fever, cough, won't eat, just sleeps all the time." Doc Morrison listened to the baby's chest with his stethoscope, felt her forehead, examined her throat. When he looked up, his expression was grave. "Pneumonia, advanced, severe malnutrition, dehydration." He paused. "Another day or two, and you would have lost her." Sarah's legs buckled. She caught herself against the table, but Thomas saw the tremor run through her body. "Can you save her?" "With treatment, yes. I'll need to keep her here overnight, maybe longer. Give her medicine, get fluids into her monitor, her breathing." He looked at Thomas. "It won't be cheap." "How much?" $5 plus medicine. It was a fortune. A week's wages for most men. Thomas reached into his pocket without hesitation and counted out $6 silver onto the desk. "For the medicine and your time, and anything else she needs." Doc Morrison took the money, then looked at Sarah. "You'll want to stay with her. I have 5 other children in the wagon. Bring them in. I have a room in back. Not fancy, but warm." Sarah looked at Thomas. He could see the question in her eyes, the calculation, the weighing of debts and obligations. "It's all right," Thomas said quietly. "Stay with your daughter. I'll bring the others in, then come back in the morning." "Where will you go?" "Home. I have livestock to tend." "But the snow. I've ridden through worse." Doc Morrison cleared his throat. "Thomas, there's a storm coming. Big one. You won't make it home before it hits." "I'll make it. You'll die trying. Stay in town. Sleep in my barn if you have to." Thomas looked out the window. The sky had darkened considerably in the last hour. The wind had picked up, rattling the shutters. Doc was right. Riding home now would be suicide. "All right." He looked at Sarah. "I'll be at the boarding house if you need me." He turned to go, but her voice stopped him. "Thomas." He looked back. "Thank you." 2 words. Simple. But they carried the weight of everything unsaid. Gratitude, confusion, the beginning of trust. Thomas nodded once and left. Outside, the storm was building. The wind cut through his coat like knives, and the first snowflakes were beginning to fall. Large, heavy flakes that promised a long night. He helped the other children out of the wagon and into Doc Morrison's house. They moved silently, eyes wide, taking in the warmth and light, with the wonder of children who had forgotten such things existed. Emma, the 9-year-old girl, looked up at him as she passed. "Is Grace going to die?" Thomas knelt beside her. "No, the doctor is going to make her better." Promise? He wanted to promise, wanted to give this child the certainty she craved. But he had made promises before, and they had turned to ash in his mouth. "I can't promise, but I believe it. And sometimes belief is all we have." Emma nodded solemnly as if he had said something profound. Then she took her siblings inside. Thomas stood in the falling snow, watching the light in Doc Morrison's window. Inside, Sarah would be sitting with her sick baby surrounded by strangers, depending on the charity of a man she did not know. And Thomas was standing in the street, having just spent a week's income on people he had met only hours ago, preparing to spend the night in a boarding house instead of his own warm cabin. He should feel regretful. foolish, used. Instead, for the first time in 3 years, he felt something close to peace. The boarding house was run by a widow named Mrs. Patterson, a formidable woman in her 50s, who charged fair prices and asked no questions. Thomas paid for a room and climbed the narrow stairs to a small chamber that smelled of lye soap and old wood. He did not sleep. He lay on the hard bed listening to the wind howl and the snow pelt against the window and thought about the choices that had led him here. 3 years of solitude. 3 years of working from dawn to dusk, speaking to no one, building walls of silence around the aching emptiness inside him. He had told himself it was healing. That time and distance would eventually fill the void Margaret and Rose had left. But tonight, holding that dying baby feeling, her breathe again, he had felt something shift. The walls had cracked. Light had gotten in. He was terrified. Caring meant risking. Risking meant losing. And he had already lost everything once. He did not think he could survive it again. But when he closed his eyes, he saw Sarah's face. The fierce determination. The bone-deep exhaustion. The love for her children that burned bright enough to keep her standing when any sane person would have collapsed. She was still fighting. After burying 3 children, after years with a drunk, after being left alone with 6 mouths to feed and no hope of survival, she was still fighting. Thomas had stopped fighting 3 years ago. He had built his cabin, worked his land, and existed, but he had not fought, had not hoped, had not lived. Maybe it was time to try again. The storm raged through the night. By morning, Sand Hollow was buried under 2 feet of fresh snow. The world had turned white and silent, muffled under winter's heavy blanket. Thomas rose early, washed in cold water from the basin, and made his way to Doc Morrison's office. The streets were empty. Most sensible people were staying inside. He found Sarah in the back room, asleep in a chair beside a small bed where Grace lay breathing steadily. The baby's color was better. The blue tinge was gone from her lips. She slept peacefully. One small hand curled against her cheek. Sarah woke as he entered. She blinked disoriented, then focused on him. "How is she?" Thomas kept his voice low. "Better. The fever broke an hour ago. Doc says she'll live." The relief in her voice was profound. Thomas felt an answering relief in his own chest. "And the others, sleeping? They ate last night. Real food, bread and stew." Emma cried. Sarah's voice wavered. She cried because she'd forgotten what butter tasted like. Thomas said nothing. There were no words adequate to that kind of poverty. Sarah stood stretched, winced as her back protested. "You came back." "I said I would. Men say a lot of things. I keep my word." She studied him for a long moment. "I believe you." It was a small statement, but it meant everything. "The storm is over," Thomas said, "but the roads will be bad for a few days. You and your children can stay here, or you can come with me. If you come, you work for your keep. Cooking, cleaning, mending. Nothing more. You sleep in the cabin. I sleep in the barn. You want to leave, you leave. No questions. No obligations beyond honest work for honest shelter." Sarah looked at her sleeping daughter. At her other children visible through the doorway, still curled together for warmth despite the fire in the hearth. At the future stretching out before them, bleak and impossible. Then she looked at Thomas. "If I say yes, it's only for the winter." "I understand. And if you break your word, I'll make you regret it." "I wouldn't expect anything less." Sarah took a deep breath, let it out slowly. "All right, we'll come." Thomas nodded. It was done. For better or worse, his 3 years of solitude were over. "I'll bring the wagon around. Doc Morrison can keep Grace a few more days until she's strong enough to travel. The rest of you can come today." He turned to go, but Sarah's voice stopped him again. "Thomas, why are you really doing this?" He paused in the doorway, considered lying, considered giving her the easy answer about charity and Christian duty. Instead, he told her the truth. "Because for 3 years I've been half dead, going through the motions. Building a life I didn't want on land, that means nothing to me. And yesterday when I saw you and your children, I saw what happens when you give up. When you stop fighting." He looked back at her. "You haven't given up, even when you had every reason to. And I guess I want to remember what that looks like, what it feels like to fight for something again." Sarah's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "We might not make it, even with your help. Maybe not, but we'll try. And trying is more than I've done in a long time. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, turning the snow-covered world into a field of diamonds. Thomas walked to the livery stable, arranged for his wagon, and began preparing for the journey home. He was bringing 7 people into his life, 7 strangers who would disrupt his carefully maintained isolation, 7 souls who could break his heart all over again. He should be afraid. Instead, as he harnessed the horses and loaded the wagon with supplies, Thomas Wade found himself whistling, a tuneless melody he had not heard since Margaret died. The sound startled him. He stopped, listened to the silence, then started whistling again. Hope, he decided, was a dangerous thing. It made you believe in possibilities, made you take chances, made you vulnerable. But maybe after 3 years of safe numbness, vulnerable was exactly what he needed to be. By noon, the wagon was ready. The children were bundled in blankets Doc Morrison had provided. Sarah sat beside Thomas on the bench, her face turned toward the road ahead. As they left Sand Hollow behind, heading north toward Thomas's cabin, in an uncertain future, neither of them spoke. There was nothing left to say. The decision was made. The path was chosen. Whatever came next, they would face it together. And in the back of the wagon, 5 children slept exhausted and fed and warm for the first time in weeks. They did not know where they were going, did not understand the bargain their mother had struck. They only knew that the man driving the wagon had saved their sister's life. And that was enough. The last of the storm clouds cleared as they reached the boundary of Thomas's land. Sunlight streamed across the valley, illuminating the cabin that stood alone against the vast white landscape. It was a simple structure. Log walls, stone chimney, a covered porch facing south. Not grand, but solid, built to last. Sarah looked at it and felt something loosen in her chest. It was not much, but it was more than she had dared hope for. Thomas stopped the wagon in front of the cabin. "Welcome home," he said quietly. Sarah looked at him sharply. "It's not home, it's shelter, for the winter." "Of course, Wistow." But there was something in his eyes, something that said he did not quite believe her, that maybe he saw what she could not yet admit to herself. That running had to stop somewhere. That winter could not last forever. That sometimes when you stopped fighting alone and accepted help, you found something you had not known you were searching for. Sarah climbed down from the wagon and looked at the cabin, at the smoke rising from the chimney, at the promise of warmth and safety. Behind her, her children were waking, looking around with wide eyes at this new place. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the layers of caution and fear and hard-won distrust, Sarah Brennan felt the tiniest flicker of something dangerous. Not hope, not yet, but the possibility of hope, which was perhaps even more terrifying. Thomas unloaded the wagon in silence, carrying blankets and supplies into the cabin. Inside, the fire he had built that morning still burned, filling the single large room with warmth. He had 2 beds as promised, one large, one small. He pointed Sarah toward the large bed. "You and the children take that one. I'll sleep in the loft when I'm inside. Most nights I'll be in the barn." Sarah nodded. She was too tired to argue, too tired to question. She just wanted her children warm and safe. As the sun set on that first day, Thomas stood outside his cabin and watched smoke rise from his chimney into the darkening sky. Inside, he could hear the soft sounds of children settling in, Sarah's voice low and gentle as she tucked them into bed. 3 years of silence broken. He did not know if this was a beginning or just a different kind of ending. Did not know if he was saving this family or condemning them all. But as he turned toward the barn where he would sleep, Thomas Wade allowed himself one small smile. For the first time in 3 years, his house was not empty, and that he decided was enough for now. The first week passed in a rhythm older than language. Wake before dawn, feed the stock, chop wood, melt snow for water, cook, eat, work, sleep, repeat. Thomas had lived this rhythm alone for 3 years, his movements precise and solitary as a monk's devotions. Now the silence was broken by the sounds of children, small feet on wooden floors, whispered conversations. The occasional laugh quickly stifled as if joy were something dangerous that might be taken away. He woke on the 7th morning to the smell of coffee. Real coffee, not the chicory substitute he had been drinking. He lay in the barn loft for a moment, disoriented, before remembering. Sarah had found his hidden store of beans, the good ones he had been saving for some occasion that never came. The sky outside was still dark. 4:30, maybe 5. He dressed quickly in the cold, pulling on wool pants worn soft with age, a flannel shirt, his heavy coat. His breath made clouds in the frozen air. The horses stirred as he climbed down from the loft. Duke nickered softly a greeting. Thomas ran his hand along the gelding's neck, feeling the warmth of muscle beneath winter coat. "Morning, old man." Duke pushed his nose against Thomas's chest, searching for the carrot that was usually there. Thomas smiled and produced it from his pocket. Some rituals were worth keeping. He fed all 4 horses their morning grain, a half-gallon of oats, each measured precisely. In winter, when the work was hard and the cold constant, the horses needed fuel the same as men did. He checked their hooves for ice buildup, cleaned out the stalls, spread fresh straw. The cattle were next, 12 head now down from the 18 he had started the year with. He had sold 6 to buy winter supplies and pay Doc Morrison. The remaining dozen were his insurance against starvation. 8 Holsteins for milk, 4 Texas Longhorns for beef if things got desperate. They stood in the shelter he had built on the north side of the barn, protected from the worst of the wind. Steam rose from their bodies in the pre-dawn cold. Thomas forked hay into their trough, checked the water trough. The surface had frozen overnight. He broke through the ice with the blunt end of an axe, watching chunks float in the dark water below. The milk cows needed attention. He pulled up a stool beside the first one, a patient old girl named Bess, and began the familiar rhythm. Squeeze and pull, squeeze and pull. The milk hissed into the bucket in steady streams. 3 gallons from 4 cows, enough for drinking and butter and cheese. By the time he finished the morning chores, the sky was beginning to lighten. Gray dawn, the sun still hidden behind the mountains to the east. Thomas carried the milk bucket toward the cabin, his boots crunching through snow that had fallen during the night. Not much, just an inch or 2, but more was coming. He could feel it in the air, smell it on the wind. The cabin door opened as he approached. Sarah stood framed in the doorway, backlit by firelight. She had been up for at least an hour, he realized. The fire was already built high, the coffee-made bread dough rising in a bowl near the hearth. "Morning." She took the milk bucket from him without waiting for an invitation. Their fingers brushed, both pulled back as if burned. "Morning." Thomas stomped snow from his boots. "You didn't have to wake so early." "Habit. I've been waking before dawn for 12 years. She poured milk into a clean jar, set it aside. "Children don't wait for daylight to be hungry." Thomas nodded. He understood. Some patterns were carved too deep to change. Inside the cabin had been transformed. Not in any dramatic way. Just small things. The floor had been swept. The dishes from last night were washed and stacked. The blankets on the children's bed were folded with military precision. Sarah's presence was written in these details, in the ordering of chaos into something manageable. The children were still asleep, 6 lumps under blankets, breathing in the soft rhythm of the young. All except Samuel. The boy sat at the table, dressed and alert, reading one of Thomas's books by firelight. He looked up as Thomas entered. "Morning, sir." "Samuel." Thomas hung his coat on the peg by the door. "You're up early." "Wanted to finish this chapter. It's about crop rotation. Says you should never plant the same thing in the same field 2 years running." Thomas poured himself the coffee, surprised. "You read well." "Ma taught me. She was a school teacher before she married Pa." Thomas glanced at Sarah. She had her back to them, working dough on the counter, but he saw her shoulders stiffen slightly. "Your mother is a wise woman." "Yes, sir." Samuel closed the book carefully. "Sir, can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "The fence on the north side, the one we fixed last week. How do you know it's strong enough? I mean, how do you know the wolves won't break through again?" Thomas sat down across from the boy. This was a real question, the kind that mattered, the kind that taught more than books ever could. You test it every day, walk the fence line, look for weak points, places where the wire is loose or the posts are starting to rot. You fix small problems before they become big ones. But that takes a lot of time. It does, but less time than rebuilding the whole fence, and less time than tracking down scattered cattle that got through a break. Samuel nodded slowly, absorbing this. Pa never did that. He'd fix something once and forget about it until it broke completely. Sarah turned from the counter. "Samuel." "It's true, Ma. You know it is." She said nothing, but her jaw was tight. Thomas spoke carefully. Every man has his own way of doing things. Your pa did the best he could with what he knew. His best wasn't very good. Samuel. Sarah's voice had an edge now. The boy fell silent, but Thomas saw the anger in his eyes. The resentment of a child who had watched his father fail and was old enough to understand what that failure meant. Thomas knew that anger, had felt it himself watching his own father drink away their farm beat, his mother die in a gutter with nothing to show for 50 years of life. Some legacies were heavy burdens. Tell you what, Thomas said, after breakfast you come with me. I need to check the fence line anyway. You can help. Samuel's face lit up. Yes, sir. Breakfast was oatmeal with milk and butter bread with honey. Simple food, but there was enough of it. Thomas watched the children eat. They were slower than that first night, more controlled. Learning that food would be there tomorrow, that they did not need to gorge like starving dogs. Emma, the 9-year-old, helped her mother serve. She moved quietly, efficiently, a small shadow. When she set Thomas's bowl in front of him, she whispered thank you so softly he almost missed it. Lucy and Lily, the 5-year-old twins, ate in perfect synchronization as if they were two parts of one being. They watched Thomas with identical wide eyes, half curious, half afraid. Daniel, the 7-year-old, ate with one hand while the other rested on his pocket. Thomas had seen the small knife the boy carried, had not mentioned it. Everyone needed something to make them feel safe. Baby Grace was still with Doc Morrison, recovering. The cabin felt incomplete without her, like a song with a missing note. After breakfast, Thomas and Samuel saddled 2 horses, Duke for Thomas, a smaller mare named Belle for the boy. Sarah watched from the porch, her face unreadable. Keep him safe, she said. It was not a request. I will. They rode north following the fence line that marked the boundary of Thomas's land. The morning was cold and clear. The sky pale blue, the sun just cresting the mountains. Their breath and the horse's breath made clouds in the frozen air. Thomas rode slowly, stopping every 100 yards to inspect the fence. He showed Samuel what to look for. Posts that had frost-heaved wood that was splitting wire that had lost tension. See here. Thomas pointed to a section where the wire sagged slightly between posts. This needs tightening. If we leave it, animals will push it under, or the next big wind will pull it down completely. How do you fix it? Thomas pulled wire cutters and a come-along from his saddlebag. He showed Samuel how to attach the come-along to the wire, how to crank it slowly until the slack was gone, how to secure it with new staples driven deep into the wood. Always carry your tools, Thomas said. You never know what you'll find. They worked their way along the fence, fixing small problems, marking larger ones for later attention. Samuel asked questions, good questions, about fence design and post depth and why you use barbed wire instead of smooth. Thomas answered them all, found himself enjoying the teaching. He had been a father once briefly, had imagined long years of teaching Rose about the world. Those years had been stolen. But here now, with this serious-faced boy, he felt an echo of that lost future. At the northern corner of his property, where his land bordered Marcus Dalton's vast holdings, they stopped. The fence here was in good condition. Thomas had made sure of that. Dalton was not a man who respected boundaries unless they were clearly marked and strongly defended. Is this Dalton's land? Samuel asked, looking at the expanse beyond the fence. It is. Ma says he's a bad man. Your ma is right. Will he try to hurt us? Thomas looked at the boy, considered lying, decided against it. Samuel had seen enough of the world to recognize lies when he heard them. He might. He wants my land, wants the water rights that come with it. He's used to getting what he wants. Will you sell? No. Even if he threatens us. Especially if he threatens us. A man who gives in to threats never stops running. Samuel nodded. Pa used to run, from debts, from people he owed money. We moved 5 times in 3 years. That must have been hard. It was. Ma tried to make it seem like an adventure, but Emma and me, we knew. We always knew. They sat on their horses in silence for a moment, looking out over Dalton's land. It was impressive, Thomas had to admit. A sprawling ranch house in the distance, barns and outbuildings, hundreds of cattle grazing in the valley. This was real wealth, the kind that bought power and influence. Sir, Samuel's voice was quiet. Yes. If Dalton comes for us, will you fight? Thomas turned in his saddle, met the boy's eyes. If I have to, but fighting is the last thing a smart man does. First you try talking, then you try the law. Fighting only happens when all else fails. Pa tried talking. It never worked. Sometimes it doesn't, but you have to try anyway. That's what separates men from animals. They rode back in silence. But it was a comfortable silence, the kind that grows between people who understand each other. As they approached the cabin, Thomas saw 3 horses tied to his porch rail. His hand moved instinctively to the rifle in his saddle scabbard. "Get behind me," he told Samuel, "but I can help." "You can help by doing what I say. Now get behind me." The boy obeyed, though Thomas could feel his resentment. 3 men stood in front of the cabin, Marcus Dalton in the center flanked by 2 hired guns. Sarah stood on the porch, her body blocking the door. The other children were inside, visible through the window. Thomas dismounted slowly, keeping his hands visible, left the rifle in its scabbard. This was not the time for guns. "Dalton." "Wade." Marcus Dalton was a big man, 6 feet tall and broad across the shoulders. 42 years old and hard as the land he owned. He dressed well, expensive boots, tailored coat, a watch chain visible across his vest. This was a man who had money and wanted everyone to know it. "Heard you picked up some strays." "Not your concern. Everything in this valley is my concern." Dalton's eyes moved as Sarah lingered, especially when a single man starts living with a woman not his wife. People talk. Thomas felt heat rise in his neck. Let them talk. The good people of Sand Hollow don't approve of sin, Wade. Might be they decide you're not fit to own land here. I'm not sinning. Mrs. Brennan works for me, cooking and cleaning. That's all. That's what you say, but who's to prove it? Dalton smiled. It was not a friendly expression. Course, if you sold me your land, you could move somewhere nobody knows you. Start fresh. I'm not selling. I'm offering $500. More than fair. The answer is no. Dalton's smile faded. You're making a mistake. That's my right. Is it? Dalton stepped closer. His 2 men moved with hands near their guns. See, Wade, you don't understand how things work here. I own this valley, the bank, the sheriff, the land office. When I want something, I get it, one way or another. Thomas held his ground. Are you threatening me? I'm educating you. There's a difference. Then let me educate you. Thomas kept his voice level, but there was steel in it. This is my land, bought and paid for, title recorded at the county seat. You want it, you'll have to kill me for it, and I don't die easy. The 2 gunmen shifted hands, moving toward their weapons. But Dalton raised a hand, stopping them. Easy, boys. Mr. Wade is just being foolish. He'll learn. He turned back to Thomas. You know what I heard about you, Wade? I heard your wife and kid died back in Missouri. Cholera, they said. But I also heard you were working a claim in the mining district. Left them alone while you were off chasing gold. They got sick. You weren't there. By the time you came back, they were dead. Thomas went very still. Where did you hear that? I hear lots of things. Point is, seems to me, you got a history of taking on more than you can handle. Letting people down. Might be you're doing it again. The words hit like fists. Not because they were entirely true, but because they were close enough to hurt. Thomas had been working. Not mining, but working. Trying to earn money for medicine when Margaret got sick. He had come home to find her dying, had watched Rose follow her mother into death. The guilt of that had followed him west, would follow him to his grave. Get off my land, Dalton laughed. Or what if you'll shoot me in front of witnesses, in front of children? He shook his head. You're not a killer, Wade. You're a farmer, and farmers always lose to ranchers. That's just the way of things. He turned to leave, then paused, looked at Sarah. Ma'am, you seem like a decent woman. Hate to see you tied to a sinking ship. You ever want real protection, real security for your children? You come see me. I'm always willing to help a lady in distress. Sarah's voice was cold. I'd rather freeze than take your help. Dalton's face hardened. You might get that chance. He mounted his horse. His men did the same. They rode away slowly, taking their time, showing they were not afraid or rushed. Thomas stood watching until they were out of sight. His hands were shaking. Not with fear, with rage. Samuel came up beside him. Are you all right, sir? Fine. He's a liar. What he said about your wife. It's not true, is it? Thomas looked down at the boy. Parts of it are. I was working when Margaret got sick. I wasn't there when she needed me. That part is true. But you came back. You tried. Trying isn't always enough. What as Sarah stepped down from the porch. You should have shot him. Thomas turned to her. Then what his men shoot me? They shoot you. Your children become orphans. For what land? For dignity. Dignity doesn't keep you warm, doesn't feed children. I've got no use for dignity that costs lives. So you'll just let him threaten us. I'll deal with him, my way, not his. Sarah stared at him for a long moment. Then she turned and went back in the east, slamming the door behind her. Samuel looked up at Thomas. She's mad. She has a right to be. What are we going to do? Thomas looked at the boy, at the cabin, at the land he had worked so hard to build into something. We're going to keep working, keep building. Dalton wants me scared, wants me to make a mistake, so I'm not going to. I'm going to be so careful, so deliberate, that when he finally tries something, I'll be ready. And if he tries something before you're ready, then we pray I'm a faster learner than he thinks. That night after the children were asleep, Sarah came out to the barn. Thomas was repairing a harness by lamplight, his hands working the worn leather with practiced ease. She stood in the doorway, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the cold. I shouldn't have said that about shooting him. Thomas did not look up from his work. You meant it. I did, but it was still wrong. You were right. About dignity not being worth dying for. I didn't say it wasn't worth dying for. Just said I wasn't going to die for it today. Tomorrow maybe, but not today. She stepped inside, closed the door against the wind. What he said about your wife, is it true? Parts of it. Will you tell me? Thomas set down the harness, looked at her. In the lamplight, her face was softer than he had seen it, less guarded. I was building a cabin, about 10 miles from town. Had a job cutting timber. Good money. I'd work all week, come home on Saturday. Margaret and Rose would be waiting. We had a good life. He paused, remembering. That last week, I should have been home Thursday, but the foreman offered double wages if I'd stay through Saturday. Margaret said to take it. We needed the money, so I stayed. And she got sick. Thursday night, according to the neighbors. They didn't tell me because they thought I was already on my way home. By the time I got there Saturday morning, she was dying. Rose was already gone. Sarah was quiet for a moment. You blame yourself. Every day. For what? For working, for trying to provide, for choosing money over presents, for thinking I had more time. We all think we have more time. Sarah's voice was soft. My third child, a boy. I felt the labor pains start in the morning. Thought I had 8 hours. Sent William to town for the midwife. She didn't come. He got drunk instead. By the time he came home that night, the baby was dead. I'd been alone the whole time. Thomas looked at her, saw the pain she carried, the same weight he bore. I'm sorry. Don't be. I stopped blaming William a long time ago. He was weak. Weak men do weak things, but I blame myself for marrying him, for not seeing what he was before it was too late. You can't see the future. No, but you can see character. I chose to ignore what was right in front of me because I wanted to believe love could fix him. It couldn't. Love doesn't fix broken people. They have to want to fix themselves. Did he want to fix himself? Sarah shook her head. He wanted to stop feeling. That's different. The drink let him forget. Forget what he'd lost, what he'd failed to be. And every day he forgot a little more until there was nothing left but the drinking. They sat in silence for a while. The lamp flickered. Outside wind rattled the barn walls. Why are you really here? Thomas asked. In my barn at this hour. Because I needed to know if I should be afraid of you. And I don't think I should. You're broken like me, but you're not cruel. And you're not weak. That's enough. She stood to leave, then paused at the door. Thomas, what Dalton said about people talking. He's right, they will. Already are, most likely. I don't want that to hurt you. I've been hurt worse. I'll survive. Will you, or will you just run again? Because if running is your plan, tell me now, before my children get attached. Thomas met her eyes. I'm not running. This is my land, my home. And as long as you and your children need it, it's yours too. Sarah nodded. Then she left, closing the door softly behind her. Thomas sat alone in the lamplight, thinking about broken people and second chance, and the difference between dignity and survival. Outside, the wind was picking up. He could smell snow on the air. A big storm, coming soon. 2 days later, the storm hit. It came from the north just after midnight, announced by wind that screamed like something alive and hungry. Thomas woke to the sound of the barn roof groaning under the assault. He dressed quickly, knowing what was coming. The blizzard arrived with the force of judgment. Snow so thick you could not see your hand in front of your face. Wind that could knock a grown man down. Temperature dropping so fast you could feel it through your coat. Thomas made his way from the barn to the cabin, one hand on the guide rope he had strung between the buildings for exactly this purpose. Without it, he would have been lost in 3 steps. Inside the cabin, the children were awake and terrified. The wind howled like wolves, the walls shook, the fire in the hearth guttered and threatened to die. Sarah stood in the center of the room, calm as stone, directing the children. Emma, more wood on the fire. Samuel, check the windows. Make sure the shutters are latched. Lucy, Lily, you stay in bed and keep Grace warm. Grace was home now, recovered enough to travel. The baby sat in the bed, eyes wide, too frightened to cry. Thomas crossed to Sarah. The barn roof, I heard it groaning. If it collapses, we lose the horses and cattle. You can't go out in this. I have to. Without the animals, we don't survive winter. You won't survive the next 10 minutes in that storm. I'll use the guide rope, tie myself to it. If I get in trouble, you can pull me back. And if the rope breaks, then you'll know not to send anyone else after me. He said it lightly, but she did not smile. This is foolish. Most necessary things are. He gathered what he needed. Extra rope, hammer, nails, a knife. He wrapped a scarf around his face, leaving only his eyes exposed. Put on his heaviest coat, his thickest gloves. Sarah watched him prepare. When he was ready, she caught his arm. Don't die. I'll do my best. I'm serious. My children have lost enough. They don't need to lose you too. Something in the way she said it made Thomas pause. This was not just about the children. I'll come back. He stepped out into the storm. The wind hit him like a physical blow, nearly knocking him down. Snow stung his exposed skin like needles. The cold was immediate and absolute. This was not weather. This was warfare. He clipped his safety rope to the guide rope and began pulling himself toward the barn. Each step was a battle. The wind pushed him sideways. Snow filled his eyes, his nose, his lungs. He could not see, could not breathe, could only pull himself forward, one handhold at a time. The barn appeared suddenly, a dark shape in the white chaos. He stumbled through the door and into relative calm. The animals were agitated. The horses stamped and whinnied. The cattle lowed in distress. Above him, the roof groaned ominously. Thomas climbed the ladder to the loft. He could see the problem immediately. The north corner where the wind hit hardest was starting to separate from the main structure. Another hour of this, and the whole thing would come down. He worked quickly despite the cold that was already numbing his fingers, drove new nails to secure the loose boards, tied support ropes from the questionable section to the main beams. It was rough work, makeshift, but it might hold. He was hammering the last nail when he heard the crack. The main support beam, old wood, stressed beyond its limit, split lengthwise. Thomas had 1 second to understand what was happening, 1 second to know he had failed. Then the beam swung down and caught him across the shoulders. He fell. The impact drove the air from his lungs. Pain exploded in his left shoulder. He lay on the loft floor, unable to move, unable to breathe, while above him, the roof continued its slow collapse. This was how it ended, crushed in his own barn, killed by his own stubborn refusal to let go. Margaret and Rose would be waiting. Perhaps that was not so bad. Then he heard shouting. The barn door crashed open. Sarah burst through, snow-covered, wild-eyed. Thomas! He tried to answer. Could not. No air. She was up the ladder in seconds, impossibly fast. She saw the beam across his shoulders, saw him struggling to breathe. Hold on. She braced herself against the ladder and pushed. The beam shifted slightly. Not much, but enough. Thomas drew a gasping breath. Pain lanced through his shoulder. Again, Sarah said through gritted teeth. Push when I push. They pushed together. The beam moved. Thomas rolled out from under it. Sarah grabbed his good arm. Can you stand? He nodded. She helped him up. Together they stumbled to the ladder down to the barn floor. The animals, Thomas gasped. Forget them. We're leaving. Sarah, if the roof goes, they'll die. If we stay, we'll die. Move. She half dragged, half carried him to the door. Clipped them both to the guide rope. Let him out into the storm. The trip back to the cabin was a nightmare. Thomas could barely stay on his feet. His shoulders screamed with every movement. Sarah kept him upright through sheer will, her small frame supporting his larger one. They fell through the cabin door together. Samuel and Emma rushed to help. They got Thomas to a chair by the fire. Sarah stripped off his wet coat, examined his shoulder with hands that shook from cold and adrenaline. It's dislocated, she said. I need to set it. You know how? I watched Doc Morrison do it once. For William. Sarah. It has to be done, unless you want a useless arm for the rest of your life. Thomas nodded, set his jaw. Sarah looked at Samuel. Hold his good shoulder. Don't let him move. She gripped Thomas's injured arm, pulled hard and fast. The pain was blinding. Thomas heard himself shout. Then there was a pop, and the agony faded to merely excruciating. It's back, Sarah said. She was breathing hard. But you'll need to keep it still for a few days, maybe a week. Thomas leaned back in the chair, sweating despite the cold. You saved my life. You saved my daughter's. We're even. Not even close. Samuel brought him whiskey. Thomas drank, felt the fire spread through his chest. It helped a little. Outside, the storm continued its assault, but they were together. They were safe. For now, Sarah sat down beside him. Neither spoke, but when she reached out and took his hand, Thomas did not pull away. In the corner, the children watched with knowing eyes. Something had shifted, changed. Their mother holding hands with the man who had saved them, the man she had just saved in return. Family, they were learning, was not always about blood. Sometimes it was about who stayed when staying was hard. The storm lasted through the night and into the next day. When it finally passed, the world was buried under 3 feet of fresh snow. The sky cleared to brilliant blue, the sun reflecting off the white landscape with blinding intensity. Thomas woke stiff and sore. His shoulder throbbed with every heartbeat, but when he tried to rise, Sarah's hand on his chest stopped him. Rest. I'll do the morning chores. You don't know how. Samuel does. You taught him. We'll manage. And they did. Thomas watched through the window as Sarah and Samuel made their way to the barn. They were gone for 2 hours. When they returned, Samuel was grinning with pride. We fed everyone. Check the roof. The beam you braced is holding. Thomas felt a swell of something unexpected. Pride. Relief. Something else he could not name. You did good. Sarah helped. She's strong for a woman. Sarah snorted. I'm strong for anyone. Don't let my size fool you. That afternoon, Thomas forced himself up. His shoulder was heavily bandaged, strapped to his chest. He could not use his left arm. But he could walk. He made his way outside to check the property. The storm had done damage. A section of fence was down. Snow had drifted against the cabin walls, nearly covering the windows. The chicken coop had lost its roof entirely, but they had survived. He was surveying the damage when he saw them. Cattle, grazing on his north field, not his cattle. His were all accounted for safe in the barn shelter. These were Dalton's cattle, 12 head of prime stock, and in the snow beside them, paper nailed to a fence post. Thomas pulled it down, read it. His face went hard. Sarah came up beside him. What is it? A legal notice. From Dalton's lawyer. Says his cattle broke through the fence during the storm and are now on my land. Under territorial law, I'm required to feed and care for them until he reclaims them. If anything happens to them, I'm liable for damages. That's absurd. It's the law, designed to help neighbors in trouble. But Dalton isn't in trouble. This is a trap. Sarah looked at the cattle, at the notice, at Thomas. What will you do? Thomas crumpled the paper in his fist. I'm going to think, because Dalton wants me to react, wants me angry and stupid. So I'm going to be calm and smart, and I'm going to find a way out of this that doesn't cost me everything. He turned back toward the cabin, stopped, looked at Sarah. Thank you for last night, for not letting me into that barn. Sarah moved his eyes. I couldn't let you, Dee. My children need you. And you, she paused, then quietly, me too. It was the first time she had admitted it, the first crack in her armor. Thomas nodded, did not press. Some things needed time. That night, he sat at the table with pen and paper, writing a letter to Sheriff Cooper, explaining the situation, asking for guidance. Samuel sat across from him, watching. What are you doing? What you do before you fight. You establish the facts, make a record. So when this goes to court, I can prove what happened. Will it go to court? Probably. Dalton wants my land. He'll use every tool he has to get it. Why does he want it so much? Thomas set down his pen. See that creek that runs through my property? That's water. In this territory, water is worth more than gold. Whoever controls the water controls the valley. Dalton has most of it, but not all. I have this section, and as long as I have it, his power is limited. So it's not personal. It's always personal, but it starts with water. Samuel was quiet for a moment. Then, if you lose, what happens to us? Thomas looked at the boy, at this child who had lost his father, who had learned not to trust men, who was slowly, carefully learning to trust again. I'm not going to lose, but if you do, then we'll figure something out, together. But I'm not planning on losing Samuel. I've lost enough. I'm done with that. The boy nodded, seemed satisfied. Outside, Dalton's cattle grazed on Thomas's hay, eating through his winter stores. Every day they stayed was a day closer to starvation. Every day was a tightening noose. But Thomas had faced death before, had looked it in the eye and walked away. He would find a way through this. He had to, because now he had something to fight for. Not just land, not just pride. He had 7 people depending on him. 7 reasons to be smart instead of strong. 7 reasons to survive. And for the first time in 3 years, Thomas Wade discovered that having something to lose made him more dangerous, not less. Because a man with nothing to lose is reckless, but a man protecting his family is relentless. And relentless in the end always wins. Sheriff Daniel Cooper arrived 3 days after Thomas sent his letter. He rode up to the cabin just past noon, his horse picking its way carefully through the snow-packed trail. Cooper was a lean man in his early 50s, with gray threading through his dark hair, and eyes that had seen too much of human nature to be surprised by any of it anymore. Thomas met him at the door. His shoulder was still strapped, but he could move without wincing now, healing slowly. Sheriff? Thomas. Cooper dismounted, tied his horse to the porch rail. Got your letter. Thought I'd come see for myself. They walked to the north field where Dalton's cattle grazed contentedly on Thomas's hay. 12 head of prime stock, each one eating through winter supplies that could not be replaced. Cooper studied the scene. The broken fence section, the cattle, the legal notice still nailed to the post, weathered now, but readable. Convenient break, Cooper said. Too convenient. You're saying Dalton did this deliberately. I'm saying the fence was fine 2 days before the storm. I checked it myself. Then the storm hits, and suddenly there's a break, right where Dalton's cattle can walk through, and he's got a legal notice ready the next morning. Yes, Sheriff, I'm saying this was deliberate. Cooper pulled the notice down, read it carefully. Says here you're required to feed and care for these animals until Dalton reclaims them. That you're liable for any damage or loss. I know what it says. Do you know the law it's citing? Territorial Livestock Protection Act of 1867, Section 4, Paragraph 2, says any landowner who finds stray livestock on their property during winter months is required to provide basic care until the owner can retrieve them. Cooper raised an eyebrow. You've been studying. I've been preparing. There's a difference. Smart. Cooper folded the notice, tucked it in his pocket. Here's the problem, Thomas. That law is real, and it's enforceable. If anything happens to these cattle, Dalton can sue you for their value. At current market prices, that's about $60 a head, $720 total. Thomas felt his stomach tighten. $720, more than he had, more than his land was worth. And if I can prove he broke the fence deliberately, can you prove it? I can prove the fence was intact 2 days before the break. That's not the same as proving Dalton cut it. Unless you saw him do it, unless you have witnesses, it's your word against his. And he's got lawyers. Good ones. Thomas looked at the cattle, at his depleting hay stores, at the trap closing around him. So what do I do? Cooper was quiet for a moment. Then, you ever heard of counter notification no? It's a legal principle, not common but valid. If you believe property has been placed on your land illegally, you can file a counter notification with the Territorial Land Office. Basically, you're notifying them that you dispute ownership and are declaring the property abandoned. I don't understand. These cattle are on your land. Dalton hasn't retrieved them. Under territorial law, if livestock remains unclaimed on private property for more than 10 days, the landowner can declare them abandoned and claim them as compensation for care and feeding. Thomas stared at him. You're saying I can take his cattle? I'm saying the law allows for it. Whether you should is a different question. Why wouldn't I? Because Dalton will fight it. He'll claim he couldn't retrieve them due to weather. He'll drag it through court. And while you're in court, you're not working, not earning, not surviving. Cooper paused. But here's the thing. If you file that notification, you put him on the defensive. He has to prove he tried to retrieve them, has to show good faith effort. And from what I can see, he hasn't made any effort at all. Thomas felt something shift. This was leverage. Not much, but something. How do I file? Ride to the land office in Sterling, 30 miles south. File in person. Cost $2. They'll issue a notice which I'll serve to Dalton personally. Then he's got 10 days to retrieve the cattle or lose claim to them. And if he retrieves them before the 10 days, then you're back where you started, but at least you're not feeding them anymore. Thomas nodded slowly. This was not victory, but it was not surrender either. It was what his father would have called a fighting retreat. You gave ground, but you made the enemy pay for every inch. I'll ride tomorrow. Good. Cooper mounted his horse. Thomas, one more thing. The talk in town about you and Mrs. Brennan, it's getting louder. Let it get louder. Some folks are saying it's not proper. A single man and a widow living together unmarried. We're not living together. She works for me. I know that. You know that. But perception matters, especially with children involved. If enough people complain, the territorial court could get involved, could question Mrs. Brennan's fitness as a mother. Thomas felt ice form in his chest. They can't take her children. They can if they decide she's living in sin. If they decide the children are being raised in an immoral environment. Cooper's face was grim. I'm not saying it's right. I'm saying it's possible. And Dalton knows people, has influence. If he wanted to make trouble for you that way, he could. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting you think about how to make the situation look more respectable before someone forces the issue. Cooper rode away, leaving Thomas standing in the snow, his mind racing. That night, Thomas sat at the table writing. The children were asleep. Sarah sat across from him, mending a shirt by lamplight. What are you writing? She asked. A counter notification for the cattle. He explained what Sheriff Cooper had told him about the law, about the 10-day rule, about filing at the land office. Sarah listened, her needle never stopping. When he finished, she said, "That's smart, using their own law against them. It's not enough. Even if I win the cattle, Dalton will find another way. Then you'll find another counter. There's something else." Thomas set down his pen. Cooper mentioned the talk, about us, about it not being proper. Sarah's hands stilled. I know, I've heard it too. At the general store last week, women whispering. It could cause problems, legal problems, for you and the children. What kind of problems? Thomas told her. About territorial courts, about morality clauses, about the power to remove children from homes deemed unfit. Sarah's face went pale. They can't. The children are mine. They can if they decide you're living in sin. But I'm not. I work for you. That's all. I know, but we can't prove it. And in the eyes of the law, appearance matters as much as truth. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Her hands trembled slightly as she set down the mending. What do we do? Thomas had been thinking about this all day, turning it over in his mind, looking for solutions that did not involve the one obvious answer. But there was no other way. Not one that protected her and the children. We could get married. The words fell into silence like stones into a well. Heavy, irrevocable. Sarah stared at him. What? It would solve the problem. If we're married, there's no question of propriety, no grounds for the court to intervene. That's insane. It's practical. It's a lie. We don't. She trailed off, flustered. It doesn't have to be real, just legal. A marriage in name only, to protect you and the children. Sarah stood abruptly, pacing to the window. She stood there, arms crossed, staring out at the darkness. I won't be a burden to you. You're not a burden. You've earned your keep 10 times over. I won't trap you into something you don't want. You're not trapping me. I'm offering. She turned to face him. Why, why would you tie yourself to a woman with 6 children? You could have anyone. Someone young, someone without all this baggage. Thomas stood, walked to her, kept a respectful distance, but held her gaze. I don't want anyone else, and I don't see baggage. I see a woman who dragged her husband's corpse through snow rather than give up. I see someone who saved my life in a blizzard. I see strength and courage and the kind of stubborn refusal to quit that I respect more than anything else in this world. Sarah's eyes were bright. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you're a good mother, a hard worker, someone who keeps her word. He paused. I know that when you're in my house, it doesn't feel empty anymore. She looked away. This is crazy. Probably. People will know it's not real. Let them think what they want. The law only cares about the certificate. Sarah was quiet for a long time. Thomas waited. This had to be her choice. He would not push. Finally, she spoke. What about you? What do you get from this? I get to keep you and your children by him. That's enough. That's not enough, not for a lifetime commitment. Then I get to not be alone anymore. I get to remember what it's like to have a family, even if it's not the traditional kind. He met her eyes. Sarah, I'm not asking you to love me. I'm not expecting anything beyond what we already have. This is purely practical, a legal protection, nothing more. Sarah studied his face, looking for deception, for hidden motives, for the catch that experience had taught her always existed. She found none. If we do this, she said slowly, we do it right. No annulment later. No taking it back when things get hard. If we marry, we stay married. Agreed. And you sleep in the barn, like now. Of course. And if you ever try to force yourself on me, I'll kill you. I would expect nothing less. She nodded once. Decision made. Then yes, I'll marry you. Thomas felt relief wash through him. This was the right thing, the smart thing, the thing that protected them all. Why then did it feel like he had just stepped off a cliff the next morning? Thomas rode to Sterling to file the counter notification on the cattle. It was a hard 30-mile ride through snow and cold, but he made it by late afternoon. The land office clerk, a thin man with ink-stained fingers, took his $2 and filed the paperwork without comment. Notice will be served within 3 days, the clerk said. After that, the 10-day waiting period begins. And if the owner retrieves them before 10 days, then the notification is void. But you're off the hook for care and feeding from the date of service. Good enough. Thomas rode home through gathering dusk. His shoulder ached from the journey. His hands were numb despite heavy gloves. But he felt something like satisfaction. He had moved, had countered, was fighting back the only way that mattered in civilized society, with law instead of guns. He arrived home to find a strange horse tied to his porch. Thomas's hand went to the rifle on his saddle. He dismounted carefully, eyes scanning the cabin. Light showed through the windows. No sounds of struggle. But something felt wrong. He pushed open the door. A man sat at his table, late 30s, well-dressed in a suit that cost more than Thomas earned in 6 months. Dark hair combed back, beard trimmed neat. Cold eyes that measured Thomas like a butcher sizing up meat. Sarah stood by the fireplace, her face pale. The children huddled on the bed, silent and afraid. Thomas Wade, the man stood, offered his hand. Caleb Harmon, Sarah's brother. Thomas did not take the hand. You're a long way from Kansas. Family business brings me. Caleb smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. I've come to collect my sister and her children. I'm not going anywhere. Sarah's voice was steady, but Thomas heard the tremor beneath. Sarah, you're living in squalor with a stranger. Your children are being raised in sin. I can't allow it. You don't have a say. Actually, I do. Caleb pulled papers from his coat. I've filed for guardianship of your children, temporary custody while the court determines your fitness as a mother. Thomas felt fury rise in his chest. On what grounds? On the grounds that my sister is cohabiting with a man not her husband, that she's living in poverty, that her children are being raised in conditions unfit for livestock, let alone human beings. Caleb's voice was smooth practiced. I'm a successful merchant. I have a large home in Topeka. I can provide education, proper food, warm beds. Everything Sarah cannot. I can provide for my children. Sarah's voice shook with rage. Can you? You're working as a servant, living in a one-room cabin with 7 other people. Your baby nearly died of pneumonia because you couldn't afford a doctor. Caleb's eyes were pitying. Sarah, I know you're trying, but trying isn't enough. You need help, real help. Let me take the children, just for a while, until you get on your feet. No, it's not your choice anymore. I have court orders. He held up the papers, signed by Judge Morrison in Topeka, valid in all territorial courts. Thomas took the papers, read them. They looked official. Seals and signatures and legal language he did not fully understand. But the meaning was clear. Caleb had legal claim to the children unless Sarah could prove she was a fit mother, and living unmarried with Thomas was evidence she was not. When does this take effect? Thomas asked. Immediately. I'm authorized to take custody as of today. You're not taking my children. Sarah moved to stand between Caleb and the bed where her children sat. Sarah, be reasonable. Get out of this house. I'm trying to help you. You're trying to control me. Like you always have. Like you tried when I married William and when I refused to come home after he died. This isn't about the children. This is about you not being able to stand that I'm living my own life. Caleb's face hardened. Your own life, you're living in charity. You have nothing. You are nothing. I'm offering you and your children a future. We have a future here. With him, Caleb gestured at Thomas, a widower playing white knight. How long before he tires of you? How long before he realizes 6 children are too much work? What happens then? Thomas stepped forward. I don't tire easily, and I keep my commitments. Is that why your wife and daughter died alone in Missouri? The room went silent. Thomas felt his hands clench. You know nothing about that. I know you were off chasing gold while they got sick. I know you came home to corpses. I know you ran west to escape your guilt. Caleb's smile was cruel. You're not a savior, Mr. Wade. You're a coward. And I won't let my sister and her children pay for your redemption. Thomas took another step forward. His vision narrowed. His pulse pounded in his ears. One punch. That's all it would take. One solid punch to wipe that smug expression off Caleb Harmon's face. But Samuel's voice stopped him. Don't. Thomas looked at the boy. Samuel stood beside the bed, eyes wide but steady. He wants you to hit him. That's why he's saying those things, so you'll lose control, so he can say you're violent. The boy was right. This was manipulation, calculated cruelty designed to provoke exactly the response Thomas was about to give. He stepped back, forced his hands to unclench. Get out of my house. It's not your house for much longer. I've also filed a claim on Sarah's property, the homestead she and William established. Legally, as her closest male relative, I have rights to administer her deceased husband's estate. That land is worthless. Perhaps, but it's principle. Sarah needs a man to handle her affairs. Since she has no husband, that responsibility falls to me. She's about to have a husband. The words were out before Thomas fully thought them through. Caleb's eyes narrowed. What? We're getting married, Sarah and I, as soon as it can be arranged. Sarah turned to stare at him. He met her eyes, hoping she understood. This was the play, the only counter they had. After a long moment, she nodded. Yes, we're engaged. Caleb laughed. How convenient. A sudden engagement right when I show up with custody papers. The court won't believe that. The court will believe whatever we tell them. We've been planning this for weeks. Ask anyone in town. Ask Sheriff Cooper. Ask Doc Morrison. It was a bluff, a complete fabrication. But Caleb did not know that. Even if you marry, the custody hearing still happens. Marriage doesn't automatically make you fit parents. No, but it makes your case harder. You're arguing Sarah is unfit because she's living in sin. If she's married, that argument disappears. I have other arguments: poverty, inadequate housing, lack of education for the children. Arguments, not proof. We'll see what the judge says. Caleb stared at Thomas for a long moment. Then he turned to Sarah. This won't work, Sarah. I have lawyers. I have money. I have connections all the way to the territorial governor. You have a broken-down cabin and a man playing hero. The children deserve better. The children deserve their mother. Get out. Caleb collected his papers, walked to the door, paused. The hearing is in 2 weeks, Sterling Courthouse. Be there. And Sarah, think carefully. Once the judge rules against you, you'll never see your children again. He left, the sound of his horse fading into the distance. Sarah sank into a chair, shaking. Emma rushed to her, wrapped small arms around her mother. Ma, he can't take us. He can't. No, baby, he can't. But Sarah's voice lacked conviction. Thomas knelt beside her chair. We'll fight this. How he's right. He has lawyers, money, power. What do we have? We have the truth, and we have each other. That won't be enough. Then we'll make it enough. Samuel came to stand beside Thomas. Will you really marry Ma? If she'll have me. Do you love her? The question was direct, childish in its simplicity, devastating in its honesty. Thomas looked at Sarah, at this woman who had survived more than most people could imagine, who fought every day just to keep her children alive, who had saved his life in a blizzard. Did he love her? He did not know. It had been so long since he loved anyone. He was not sure he remembered what it felt like, but he knew he would fight for her, would stand between her and harm, would give everything he had to keep her and her children safe. Maybe that was close enough. I respect your mother more than anyone I've ever known, and I'll protect her with my life. If that's not love, it's near enough. Samuel nodded, satisfied. Sarah looked up at Thomas. We should have talked about this before you announced it to Caleb. I know, I'm sorry, but it was the only play I saw. You could have let me make that decision. You're right, I should have. Thomas stood. If you want to call it off, I'll understand. We'll find another way. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then, no, you were right. It's the only move that makes sense. But we do this properly. Not a fake marriage. A real one. Sarah. I won't have people saying it's a sham. I won't give Caleb that weapon. We marry for real, Thomas. All the way. Thomas understood what she was saying, what she was offering, and what she was asking. This would not be a marriage in name only. It would be real, binding, permanent. All right, real. And you move into the house. We share a bed. Like proper married people. Thomas felt his face heat. Sarah, I won't force. I know you won't, but we have to look married, act married, or Caleb will use it against us. She was right. Damn her, she was right. Okay? We'll go to town tomorrow, file the papers, get it done before the hearing. Agreed. Sarah stood, looked at her children, at Thomas, at the small cabin that had become their refuge. He's not taking you, she told her children. I don't care what papers he has. I don't care about courts or judges or lawyers. You're mine, and I'll burn this whole territory down before I let anyone take you. Emma was crying now. Lucy and Lily clung to each other. Daniel sat stone-faced on the bed. Samuel just watched his young face old with understanding. We should sleep, Sarah said. Tomorrow we ride to town. Tomorrow we become a family, legal and binding. That night, Thomas lay in the barn loft, unable to sleep. In 2 weeks, he would stand in a courtroom and fight for the right to keep 7 people who were not even his blood. In less than a day, he would marry a woman he barely knew, binding himself to her forever. 3 months ago, he had been alone, deliberately, carefully alone, building walls of silence and solitude around the gaping wound in his chest. Now he was about to become a husband again, a father again, a target for men like Dalton and Caleb, who saw opportunity in destruction. He should be terrified. Instead, he felt something he had not felt in 3 years. Purpose, not just existence, not just survival, but purpose, a reason to get up in the morning beyond habit, a reason to fight beyond pride. He was protecting something again, building something again, being something more than a ghost haunting his own life. Margaret would have liked Sarah, he thought, would have respected her strength, would have loved her fierce protection of her children. And Rose, sweet Rose, would have had 6 siblings to play with, would have had a mother who sang and a father who smiled, would have had a life. Thomas closed his eyes against the sting of tears. Grief was like that. It ambushed you at unexpected moments. In the middle of planning a wedding you never wanted, in the middle of fighting for a family that was not yours, but somehow had become yours anyway. I hope I'm doing right, he whispered to the darkness, to Margaret, to Rose, to whatever ghosts listened. I hope you'd understand. The darkness gave no answer, but somewhere in the cabin a baby cried and was quickly soothed. Children murmured in sleep. A woman moved through the small space, checking on each child, tucking blankets, whispering comfort. The sounds of a family. Thomas fell asleep to that music and dreamed for the first time in years of something other than graves. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Thomas woke early as always, but today felt different. Today felt like a before and after moment, the last morning of his life as a solitary man. He did the chores quickly, fed the stock, milked the cows, chopped extra wood because they would be gone most of the day. By the time he finished, Sarah had breakfast ready and the children dressed. You don't have to all come, Thomas said. Just Sarah and I can go. We all go. Sarah's voice left no room for argument. We're a family now. We act like one. So they all crammed into the wagon. Thomas drove. Sarah sat beside him. 6 children in the back bundled against the cold silent with the weight of what was happening. The ride to Sand Hollow took 2 hours. Nobody spoke. There was nothing to say. They all knew what was at stake. The town was quiet when they arrived. A Thursday morning, most people working. Thomas pulled the wagon up to the courthouse, a 2-story building that also served as land office, tax office, and general administrative center for the territory. Inside, the clerk who handled marriage licenses looked up from his desk with barely disguised curiosity. Thomas Wade, didn't expect to see you. Need to file for a marriage license. The clerk's eyebrows rose. He looked past Thomas to Sarah, to the 6 children crowding the small office. I see. And the bride's name, Sarah Brennan. Previous marriage, widowed. Children, 6. The clerk wrote carefully. You understand this is a legal and binding contract, no annulment except in cases of fraud or coercion. We understand. And you're both entering this marriage freely, no duress. No duress, Sarah said firmly. The clerk studied them both, looking for signs of coercion, of deception. Finally, he nodded. License fee is $3. Waiting period is normally 3 days, but I can waive that if you have good cause. We have a custody hearing in 2 weeks. Need to be married before then. The clerk's expression shifted to sympathy. He had clearly heard about Caleb Harmon's arrival. Small towns had no secrets. I'll waive the waiting period, but you'll need someone to perform the ceremony. Judge Williams is available, or Reverend Carter at the church. The judge, Thomas said, he did not want this in a church, did not want to make promises before God that he was not sure he could keep. I'll send word. He can see you in an hour. They waited outside in the cold. The children grew restless. Daniel threw snowballs at fence posts. Lucy and Lily built a small snowman. Emma sat close to her mother, holding her hand. Samuel stood beside Thomas. Are you scared? The boy asked. Terrified. Really? Really, marriage is serious. It's promising to care for someone for the rest of your life. That's a big promise. But you kept your promise to us about the cabin, about keeping us safe so far. You'll keep this one too. The certainty in the boy's voice made Thomas's throat tight. When had Samuel started believing in him? When had any of them? Judge Williams arrived precisely an hour later. He was a stout man in his 60s with a face like weathered leather and eyes that missed nothing. Wade, Mrs. Brennan, heard you two wanted to make it legal. Yes, sir. Also heard Caleb Harmon is trying to take the children. He is. Man's a snake. Pardon my French, ma'am. Williams looked at Sarah. You sure about this marriage is permanent? I'm sure. And you, he turned to Thomas, you understand you're taking on responsibility for 6 children. That's no small thing. I understand. Williams nodded. All right then, let's get this done. They stood in the small courtroom. No flowers, no music, no guests except 6 children who served as witnesses. Judge Williams opened his book, began reading the words that had joined people in matrimony for centuries. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here. Thomas barely heard the words. He was too focused on Sarah's face. She looked pale, determined, scared, brave, beautiful. The thought startled him. Do you, Thomas Wade, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part? I do. And do you, Sarah Brennan, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part? Sarah's voice was quiet but steady. I do. By the power vested in me by the territory of Nebraska, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride. Thomas looked at Sarah. She looked back. Neither moved. Judge Williams cleared his throat. It's customary. Thomas leaned forward, kissed Sarah's cheek. Brief, chaste. The kiss of strangers forced into intimacy by circumstance. It was done. They were married. Congratulations, Williams said not unkindly. May you find happiness together. Outside the sun had come out. Snow sparkled like diamonds. The children crowded around, excited despite everything. Are you really married now? Lucy asked. Really married, Sarah confirmed. Does that mean Mr. Wade is our pa now? Sarah looked at Thomas. He looked at the children. At these 6 small faces turned up to him with hope and fear and desperate need for stability. If you want me to be. We want, Samuel said. The other children nodded. Then I guess I'm your pa. Emma. Emma hugged him. Thomas stiffened in surprise and slowly put his arms around the girl. Lucy and Lily joined in. Then Daniel. Then Samuel, trying to act too old for such things but unable to resist. Thomas stood in the snow surrounded by children who were now legally his, married to a woman he barely knew, facing a legal battle in 2 weeks that could destroy everything. He should feel trapped. Instead, for the first time since Margaret died, he felt like he had come home. They rode back to the cabin in the wagon, the marriage certificate tucked safely in Sarah's pocket. Legal proof, binding documentation, armor against Caleb's claims. But as Thomas drove, he could not stop thinking about what came next. Tonight he would move into the cabin, would share a bed with Sarah, would begin living as a married man in truth, not just on paper. 3 years of solitude ended. He glanced at Sarah. She sat rigid beside him, staring straight ahead. Thinking the same thoughts probably. Wondering what she had gotten herself into. We'll figure it out, Thomas said quietly. Will we? We have to. She nodded, but she looked as terrified as he felt. That night after the children were asleep, Thomas moved his things from the barn to the cabin. It did not take long. He owned little. Clothes, a razor, a comb, a photograph of Margaret and Rose in a tin frame. He set the photograph on a shelf. Sarah saw it, said nothing. The bed was not large, designed for 1 person, maybe 2 if they were close. With both of them, it would be tight. I can sleep on the floor, Thomas offered. No, people will ask. Children will notice. We share the bed. Sarah, I trust you. You've had weeks to hurt me and haven't. I'm not afraid of sharing a bed. So they lay down together, Thomas on one side, Sarah on the other, a careful space between them. Both fully clothed, both rigid with awareness of the other's presence. Thomas stared at the ceiling, acutely conscious of every breath Sarah took, the warmth of her body beside his, the faint scent of soap and wool. Thomas, yes. Thank you for today, for doing this. You're welcome. Silence. Then, do you regret it? No. Do you, him? Ask me in a year. He smiled in the darkness. Fair enough. More silence. Then Sarah's hand found his, squeezed gently. We'll make this work. I know. Eventually exhaustion claimed them both. They slept not touching, except for their joined hands. And in the morning when Thomas woke to find Sarah's head resting on his shoulder and his arm around her waist, neither of them mentioned it. Some things were better left unspoken. 2 weeks later, they stood in the Sterling courthouse, facing Caleb Harmon and his lawyer across a courtroom that smelled of old wood and older justice. The war for Sarah's children was about to begin, and Thomas Wade, married exactly 14 days, was about to find out if the law he had learned to use as a weapon would be enough to protect the family he had never planned to have. The Sterling Courthouse stood at the end of Main Street like a monument to civilization's fragile hold on the frontier. 2 stories of brick and timber, it was the tallest building for 50 miles. Inside, the air was thick with tobacco smoke and the bitter smell of winter coats worn too long without washing. Thomas sat on a hard wooden bench, Sarah beside him, 6 children arranged in descending order of age on the bench behind them. They had arrived early before the sun was fully up because Thomas wanted to see the battlefield before the fight began. Caleb Harmon sat across the aisle with his lawyer, a lean man named Silas Porter, who wore a suit that cost more than most men earned in a year. Porter had a face like a hatchet and eyes that calculated odds the way a gambler counts cards. He was good at his job. That made him dangerous. The courtroom filled slowly, ranchers and farmers drawn by the promise of drama. Mrs. Abigail Porter, Marcus Dalton's friend, sitting in the front row with a satisfied smile. Dalton himself lounging in the back, watching everything with the patience of a predator. At precisely 9 o'clock, Judge Henry Wallace entered, the same man who had married Thomas and Sarah 2 weeks ago. He took his seat behind the bench, arranged his papers, and looked out over the courtroom with tired eyes that had seen too many of these cases. We are here to consider the petition of Caleb Harmon for temporary guardianship of 6 minor children currently in the care of their mother, Sarah Wade, formerly Sarah Brennan. Wallace's voice was flat, bureaucratic. Mr. Porter, you may present your case. Silas Porter stood, smoothed his jacket, began. Your Honor, this is a simple matter of child welfare. My client, Mr. Harmon, is a successful merchant in Topeka, Kansas. He owns a large home, employs a staff, and is financially secure. He is also the closest living male relative to these children, their maternal uncle. Porter paused, letting that sink in. In 1871, male relatives had legal standing that mothers sometimes did not. 2 months ago, Mr. Harmon learned that his sister Sarah had been widowed and was living in desperate circumstances. He traveled to Nebraska to offer assistance, only to discover that she was cohabiting with a stranger, a Mr. Thomas Wade, living in sin, exposing her children to immoral conditions. That's a lie, Sarah said, her voice sharp. Judge Wallace raised his hand. Mrs. Wade, you'll have your chance to speak. Mr. Porter, continue. Thank you, Your Honor. Upon discovering this situation, Mr. Harmon attempted to offer his sister legitimate help. A home in Kansas, education for the children, proper Christian upbringing. She refused, and then conveniently announced a sudden marriage to Mr. Wade. Porter pulled papers from his case. I have here affidavits from 3 residents of Sand Hollow, all swearing that they saw no evidence of courtship between Mrs. Wade and Mr. Wade prior to Mr. Harmon's arrival, all stating that the marriage appears to be a fraud, a legal maneuver designed solely to prevent this court from acting in the children's best interest. Thomas felt Sarah tense beside him. This was the attack they had expected, but hearing it laid out in formal legal language made it sound more damning than it was. Furthermore, Porter continued, even if we accept the marriage as legitimate, the question of fitness remains. Mrs. Wade and Mr. Wade live in a single-room cabin, 7 children and 2 adults in perhaps 400 square feet of space. The children sleep on a single bed. They have no formal schooling. They wear clothes that are little better than rags. That's not true, Emma whispered behind Thomas. He heard the hurt in her voice. Porter was building to his conclusion. Thomas could see it, the rhetorical structure, the careful arrangement of facts and implications. Your Honor, we are not questioning Mrs. Wade's love for her children. We are questioning her ability to provide for them, and we are asking this court to do what the law requires, to put the welfare of children in above the pride of parents, to grant temporary custody to Mr. Harmon, who can provide everything these children need and deserve. Porter sat down. The courtroom murmured. Thomas heard the whispers, saw the nodding heads. Porter had made his case well. Judge Wallace looked at Thomas. Mr. Wade, you're representing yourself. Yes, Your Honor. You understand you're at a disadvantage, said Mr. Porter is an experienced attorney. I understand, but I also understand the truth, and I'm hoping that's enough. Wallace nodded. Present your case. Thomas stood. He had spent 2 weeks preparing for this moment, reading law books borrowed from Sheriff Cooper, practicing his arguments in the barn, learning the language of courts and judges. But now standing before Wallace with the weight of 7 lives depending on what he said next, all his preparation felt inadequate. He started with the simplest truth he knew. Your Honor, 3 months ago I was alone. I had 80 acres of land and a cabin and enough money to survive. I also had nothing worth living for. I was going through the motions, existing, but not living. He paused. The courtroom was silent. Then I saw a woman dragging her dead husband through the snow, a woman with 6 children and no hope of surviving winter. I could have ridden past, should have probably. I didn't need the complication, didn't need the responsibility. But I stopped, and I offered help. And that woman, that proud, stubborn, fierce woman, accepted help she didn't want to need because she loved her children more than her pride. Thomas looked at Sarah. She was watching him with eyes that shone with unshed tears. Over the past 3 months, Sarah Wade has worked harder than any person I've ever known. She's up before dawn. She cooks, she cleans, she teaches her children to read and write using my old books. She mends clothes until there's more patch than original fabric. She does all this while caring for a baby who nearly died of pneumonia. And yes, Your Honor, we live in a small cabin, 1 room. It's not fancy, but it's warm, it's safe, and it's filled with more love than a mansion full of strangers. He turned to face Caleb directly. Mr. Harmon says he can provide for these children. Maybe he can. Maybe his house is bigger, his food better, his clothes newer. But can he provide what they really need? Can he provide a mother who would die for them? Can he provide stability, consistency, love? Caleb's face remained impassive, but Thomas saw the tightening around his eyes. Your Honor, Mr. Porter claims our marriage is a fraud, that we married to avoid this court. He's half right. We did marry to protect the children, but that doesn't make it a fraud. It makes it a sacrifice. Sarah gave up her independence. I gave up my solitude. We both gave up easier lives because we believed these children deserved a family. Thomas pulled papers from his own pocket. I have here a letter from Doc Morrison. He treated baby Grace. He states that without immediate medical intervention, which I paid for, the child would have died. He also states that Sarah's care since that day has been exemplary. He held up another paper. A letter from James Chen, who owns the general store. He states that Sarah pays her bills on time, that she's honest, that her children are well-behaved and respectful. One more paper. A letter from Reverend Carter. He notes that we attend church every Sunday, that the children participate in Sunday school, that we are, in his words, a model Christian family. Wallace took the letters, read them carefully. His expression revealed nothing. Thomas continued. Mr. Harmon asked this court to remove these children from their mother, to send them 1,000 miles away to live with a man they barely know, to separate them from everything familiar. From each other, most likely, since I doubt Mr. Harmon's house is set up to accommodate 6 additional children. Your Honor, the law exists to protect children, not to punish mothers for being poor, not to reward wealthy uncles for being rich. Sarah Wade is a good mother. These children are thriving under her care, and this court has no legitimate reason to tear this family apart. Thomas sat down. His hands were shaking. He had said everything he could think to say. Now it was up to Wallace. The judge was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke. Mrs. Wade, I'd like to hear from you. Sarah stood. Thomas saw her hands clasped tight in front of her knuckles white. Your Honor, I don't have fancy words like these men. I'm not educated in law. I only know one thing. Those children are mine. I birthed them. I raised them. I've sacrificed everything for them. Her voice grew stronger. When my husband drank away our money, I found ways to feed them. When he died and left us with nothing, I found ways to survive. When Grace got sick and I had no money for a doctor, I found help. My brother says he wants to save my children. But where was he when William was beating me? Where was he when I lost 3 babies because I couldn't afford a midwife? Where was he for the past 12 years? She turned to Caleb. You abandoned me when I married William because you didn't approve. You said I was dead to you. Those were your words. Dead to you. And now when I finally found safety, found a good man, found a chance at a real life, you show up claiming you care. Caleb's face remained stone, but Thomas saw the flicker, the guilt. Your Honor, I'm not rich. I probably never will be. But I love my children, and they love me, and they love Thomas, and we're a family, a real family. And you can't take that away because we don't have enough money or a big enough house. Sarah sat down. She was crying now, but her back was straight, her chin up. Judge Wallace looked at the children. Samuel, is it the oldest? Samuel stood. Yes, sir. Tell me, son, do you want to go with your uncle to Kansas? No, sir. Why not? Samuel glanced at his mother, at Thomas. Because my family is here, my ma and my pa. They need me, and I need them. Your pa, you mean Mr. Wade? Yes, sir, he's my pa now. Wallace nodded. Sit down, son. He looked at his papers. The courtroom waited in breathless silence. Finally, Wallace spoke. Mr. Harmon, I've read your petition. I've heard your lawyer's arguments. And I'll admit on paper you make a compelling case. Thomas felt his stomach drop. You are financially secure. You can provide material comfort that Mrs. Wade cannot. Under normal circumstances, that would weigh heavily in my decision. Wallace paused. But these are not normal circumstances. Mrs. Wade is not an unfit mother. She's a poor mother. There's a difference. And in my 30 years on this bench, I've learned that poverty is not the same as neglect. He looked at Caleb directly. Mr. Harmon, I'm denying your petition. Mrs. Wade retains full custody of her children. This court finds no evidence of unfitness, no evidence of neglect, no evidence of any condition that would justify removing children from their mother's care. The courtroom erupted. Caleb shot to his feet. Your Honor, this is outrageous. You're condemning these children to poverty. I'm allowing these children to remain with their mother. There's a difference, Wallace's voice was sharp. Mr. Harmon, if you truly care about these children's welfare, you're welcome to provide financial support. Send money, send clothes, send books, but you will not take them. He banged his gavel. This hearing is concluded. Sarah collapsed against Thomas, sobbing. The children rushed forward. Emma, Lucy, Lily, Daniel, all talking at once. Samuel stood apart, trying to maintain composure, but failing. Even he was crying. Thomas held them all. This makeshift family, this collection of broken pieces that had somehow formed a whole. Caleb approached slowly. His face was thunderous. This isn't over. Yes, it is. Thomas met his eyes. The judge ruled, it's over. You think you've won nothing. I'll be back. And next time I'll make sure you lose everything. Why? Sarah's voice cut through the noise. Why do you hate me so much? Caleb's face twisted. For a moment, Thomas saw real emotion there. Pain, anger, grief. Because you left. Because you chose him over your own family. Over me, Ty. William wasn't my choice. He was my escape. From you. From father. From everything. And look how that turned out. It turned out badly, but it was mine. My choice. My life. My mistake. Sarah stepped closer to her brother. I don't hate you, Caleb, but I don't trust you, and I never will. So take your money and your big house and your self-righteousness and go back to Kansas. Leave us alone. Caleb stared at her. Then he turned and walked out. Silas Porter followed, already calculating his fee. The courtroom slowly emptied. Only Sheriff Cooper remained standing near the door. That was well done, he said to Thomas. Not many men could have argued that case and won. I didn't win. The truth won. Maybe, but you presented it well. Cooper paused. Watch yourself, Thomas. Dalton was here. He saw everything. And he's not going to be happy that you beat Caleb. Makes him look weak by association. Let him be unhappy. I'm serious. Dalton's been quiet these past 2 weeks. That's not like him. He's planning something. Thomas nodded. He had felt it too. The calm before the storm. Dalton's cattle were still on his land, eating through his hay stores. The 10-day notification period had passed, but Dalton had filed a counter motion dragging the case into legal limbo. They were bleeding Thomas dry. Slowly. Deliberately. I can handle Dalton. I hope so. Cooper tipped his hat to Sarah. Ma'am, congratulations. He left. Thomas, Sarah, and the children stood alone in the empty courtroom. We won, Emma said, her voice filled with wonder. We won, Sarah confirmed. They walked out into bright winter sunlight. The world looked different somehow, sharper, more real, as if winning had brought everything into focus. But as they climbed into the wagon for the long ride home, Thomas could not shake Cooper's warning. Dalton was planning something, and whatever it was coming soon. They arrived home just before dark. Thomas helped Sarah and the children down from the wagon, then went to tend the horses. He was tired, bone-deep tired, the kind that came from stress rather than labor. He was unharnessing Duke when he smelled it. Smoke, not chimney smoke, burning wood, fresh, close. Thomas spun toward the barn. Flames licked up the northern wall. The fire was small, still just starting. But in the dry winter air with all that old wood and hay, it would spread fast. Fire, Thomas shouted toward the cabin. Sarah, fire! He ran to the barn, grabbing buckets as he went. The well was 50 feet away. Too far. Not enough time. Samuel appeared at his side. What do we do? Get every bucket, every pot, every container that holds water. Fill them from the well. Form a line. Move, Samuel ran. Thomas yanked open the barn door. The horses were inside. Screaming. Terror made them wild. Thomas ran to the first stall, unlocked it, grabbed Duke's halter. The horse reared, eyes rolling white. Easy, easy boy, come on. He dragged Duke out. The horse did not want to leave the barn, did not understand that staying meant death. Thomas had to muscle him through the door using all his strength. Outside, Samuel had organized the children. They stood in a line from the well to the barn, passing buckets. Water sloshed and spilled. Their aim was terrible, but they were trying. Thomas ran back for the next horse. Belle was easier trained to follow. The third horse, Thunder, took precious minutes. By the time Thomas got the fourth horse out, the fire had spread across the entire north wall. The cattle. Thomas ran to the shelter on the north side. 12 head trapped in a small space, the fire between them and freedom. He grabbed a pitchfork, used it to knock down a section of the shelter's wall, created an opening. Get out, move, go. The cattle stampeded through the gap. Thomas barely got clear before they thundered past, driven mad by smoke and fear. The barn was fully engulfed now. Flames shot 30 feet into the air. Heat like a physical force pushed Thomas back. The house! Sarah screamed. The wind's blowing embers toward the house. She was right. The wind had shifted. Burning fragments drifted through the air, landing on the cabin's roof. On the dry wood shingles Thomas had nailed down last fall. They could lose it all. Barn and house. Everything. Everyone inside, Thomas shouted. Get every blanket, every cloth. We need to soak them and cover the roof. They worked with desperate speed, soaking blankets, climbing onto the roof, spreading wet fabric over the shingles, stamping out embers as they landed. The fire burned for 3 hours. By the time it finally collapsed in on itself, leaving only smoldering ruins, the barn was gone. Completely gone. Just a skeleton of charred timbers and ash. Thomas sat in the snow, covered in soot and burns, his hands blistered, his lungs raw from smoke, watching everything he had built destroyed. Sarah sat beside him, also blackened, also exhausted. How did it start? She asked. I don't know. I'll check in the morning when it's cool enough. But Thomas already knew. This was not accident. This was Dalton. Had to be. The children came out slowly, one by one, stood looking at the destruction. Where will the animals sleep? Lucy asked. I'll build a shelter tomorrow. They'll be all right. But all your tools, your supplies, everything was in there. Things can be replaced. Can they? Sarah's voice was hollow. Can you replace a winter's worth of hay? Can you replace the feed for the chickens? Can you replace everything you lost? Thomas had no answer. She was right. The hay was gone. The feed was gone. Half his tools, anything made of wood, destroyed. His spare lumber, his nails, his rope. He could survive this. Barely, but only if nothing else went wrong. And Dalton was not done. Thomas knew that with absolute certainty. This was just the opening move. That night they huddled in the cabin. The horses and cattle stood in the yard exposed to the elements. Thomas had covered them with every spare blanket he owned, but it was not enough. He sat at the table making lists. What he needed, what it would cost, how he would pay for it. The numbers did not work. No matter how he calculated, he could not make it work. We could sell the cattle, Sarah said quietly. We need them, for milk, for meat if it gets desperate. Then what? Thomas looked at her. At this woman who had married him to save her children, who had worked herself to exhaustion, who had just spent 3 hours fighting fire to save his house. I could sell the land. No, Sarah's voice was sharp. That's exactly what Dalton wants. I know, but what choice do I have? We'll find another way. What way? I'm almost out of money. I've lost half my winter supplies. I can't rebuild the barn without lumber, and lumber costs money I don't have. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then she pulled something from her pocket, a small cloth bag. She opened it. Inside were coins, silver and gold. I've been saving from before, hidden from William. It's not much, maybe $40. Thomas stared at the money. Sarah, that's yours. It's ours. We're married, remember. What's mine is yours. I can't take your savings. You're not taking. I'm giving. For the family. For all of us. Thomas felt his throat tighten. It's not enough. Even with this, I can't rebuild everything. Then rebuild what you must. Let the rest go. Sarah. Thomas, I've been poor my whole life. I know how to survive with less. We'll make do. She was right. They would make do. They always had. But making do was getting harder. The next morning, Thomas walked through the ruins of the barn. The embers had cooled enough to search. He poked through the ash, looking for anything salvageable. He found the source of the fire quickly. Too quickly, as if it had been meant to be found. A kerosene lamp, broken, deliberately placed in the corner where hay was stored. This was arson, no question. Thomas picked up the lamp's base, turned it over in his hands, felt rage build in his chest. Dalton. It had to be Dalton, but proving it was different than knowing it. He had no witnesses, no evidence beyond a broken lamp that could have been there for months. He heard hoofbeats, looked up to see Sheriff Cooper riding toward him. Heard about the fire, came to see how bad it was. Cooper dismounted, looked at the ruins, whistled low. Hell of a mess. It was arson. You sure? Thomas showed him the lamp. This was placed deliberately, in the driest spot in the barn. Cooper examined the lamp. His face was grim. Dalton's fire. Who else can you prove it? No. Then I can't do anything. My hands are tied without proof. Thomas wanted to scream, wanted to punch something, wanted to ride to Dalton's ranch and demand justice at gunpoint. But that was what Dalton wanted. Wanted Thomas to lose control, to do something stupid, something criminal. What do I do? Thomas asked. You rebuild. You survive. You outlast him. How I've lost everything. Not everything. You've still got your land, your house, your family. Cooper put a hand on Thomas's shoulder. I know it's hard, but giving up is what he wants. Don't give it to him. The sheriff left. Thomas stood alone in the ashes, holding a broken lamp, feeling the weight of responsibility crushing down. He had 7 people depending on him. 7 people who needed shelter and food and warmth. And he was failing them. That night, as Thomas and Sarah lay in bed, she spoke into the darkness. We'll survive this. You don't know that. I do, because we have to, because we have 6 children who need us. She paused. And because I'm pregnant. Thomas went completely still. What? I'm pregnant. About 3 months. I wasn't sure at first, but now I am. 3 months. That means before we were married, from that first month. Sarah's voice was quiet. I didn't tell you because I thought you'd feel trapped. Thought you'd married me out of obligation, not choice. But you should know. We're going to have a baby. This summer. Thomas could not speak. Could not think. Another child and another mouth to feed. Another responsibility he could not afford. And yet, another chance. Another life. Another reason to fight. He pulled Sarah close. Felt her breath against his chest. We'll make it work. How? I don't know, but we will. Because he had to. Because 7 was about to become 8. Because his family was growing even as his resources shrank. And because Thomas Wade had learned something in 3 months with Sarah and her children. You did not survive by being strong alone. You survived by being strong together. The storm was coming, had already started really. Dalton would not stop, would keep pushing until Thomas broke or sold or left. But Thomas was not going to do any of those things. He was going to stand, was going to fight, was going to protect his family with everything he had. Even if everything he had was not enough. Even if the kind was everything he was, because that was what family meant. What being a husband and father meant. You stood, you fought, you endured, and you did it together. The barn fire was just the beginning. Thomas knew that. Knew Dalton had more planned, more attacks, more pressure. But knowing did not make it easier when 3 days later, Thomas found all 12 of his cattle dead. They had not died naturally. Someone had poisoned them, put something in their water, killed $700 worth of livestock in a single night. Thomas stood among the carcasses looking at the animals who had been his insurance against starvation and felt something break inside him. Not his will, not his determination. His faith that right would prevail, that goodness would triumph, that the law would protect the innocent. That faith died among the poisoned cattle, and something harder took its place. If Dalton wanted war, Thomas would give him war, not with guns, not with violence, but with something more powerful, with the truth, with witnesses, with evidence gathered painstakingly and presented irrefutably. Thomas would destroy Marcus Dalton the same way Dalton was trying to destroy him, piece by piece, move by move, until one of them had nothing left. And Thomas Wade, standing in a field of dead cattle with a pregnant wife and 7 children depending on him, made a promise to the cold winter sky. He would be the one left standing, no matter what it cost, no matter how long it took. He would win, because losing was not an option anymore, not when he had everything to lose. The morning after finding the dead cattle, Thomas rode to town before dawn. He left Sarah with the rifle and strict instructions to keep the children inside. Whatever was coming next, he would not let it catch them unprepared. Sterling's main street was empty when he arrived. The shops were still shuttered. The only light came from Doc Morrison's office, where the old surgeon often worked through the night on difficult cases or memories that would not let him sleep. Thomas tied Duke to the rail and knocked. Doc answered in his shirt sleeves, a half-empty bottle of whiskey on his desk. Not drunk, just tired. The kind of tired that came from seeing too much suffering and being unable to prevent most of it. Thomas, it's early even for you. I need your help. Doc studied Thomas's face, saw something there that made him step aside without another word. Inside, Thomas told him everything. The barn fire, the poisoned cattle, Caleb's custody attempt, Dalton's campaign of destruction. I need evidence, Thomas said. Real evidence. The kind that holds up in court. What kind of evidence? The cattle. Can you examine them? Tell how they died, what poison was used. Doc considered. I'm not a veterinarian, but you know anatomy. You know toxicology. You could tell something. Maybe, but even if I could prove they were poisoned, that doesn't prove Dalton did it. It's a start. It establishes a pattern. Fire, poison. Someone is trying to drive me off my land. Doc nodded slowly. All right, I'll look at the cattle. But Thomas, even with evidence, Dalton has influence, money, friends in the territorial government. Then I'll need more than evidence. I'll need witnesses, people willing to testify. About what? About Dalton's character, his methods, his threats. Thomas paused. Doc, you've lived here 20 years. You know everyone. You know their secrets. Help me find people who will stand up. Doc Morrison poured 2 glasses of whiskey, handed one to Thomas. You're asking me to start a war. I'm asking you to help me finish one I didn't start. Doc drank, thought, finally nodded. All right, but we do this smart, quiet. We gather evidence slowly, build a case that can't be denied. He paused. And Thomas, you need to understand, even if we win, Dalton won't forget. Men like him never do. I know, but I can't keep living in fear. Can't keep watching him destroy everything I've built. Then let's build something he can't destroy. Over the next week, Thomas and Doc Morrison worked in secret. Doc examined the cattle, confirmed they had been poisoned with arsenic mixed into their water supply. He documented everything, drew diagrams, wrote detailed reports in his careful physician's hand. Thomas visited every ranch and farm within 20 miles. Talked to people, listened to stories, learned that he was not Dalton's only victim. A homesteader named Henrik Larson told Thomas how Dalton had diverted a creek that ran through both their properties, leaving Henrik's fields dry. When Henrik complained, his barn mysteriously burned down 2 weeks later. A widow named Catherine Mills described how Dalton had offered to buy her late husband's land for half its value. When she refused, her well was contaminated with animal carcasses. A rancher named Jack Sullivan spoke quietly about how Dalton's men had stampeded his cattle through a fence, then sued him for damages when the animals ended up on Dalton's land. The pattern was clear. Dalton wanted control of the valley. Anyone who stood in his way was crushed, legally when possible, illegally when necessary. But people were afraid to speak publicly. Dalton owned the bank, held mortgages, could ruin families with a word. "They need to see someone stand first," Doc Morrison said. "They need to see it's possible to fight and survive." "How do I show them that when I'm barely surviving myself?" Doc smiled. "You keep standing. That's how." Thomas worked 18-hour days, rebuilt a rough shelter for the horses from salvaged lumber and borrowed materials, hunted game to replace the lost cattle, planted an early garden with seeds James Chen sold him on credit. Sarah worked beside him. Her belly was starting to show, now though she wore loose dresses to hide it. She was tired all the time, but she never complained, never stopped. The children helped however they could. Samuel, now comfortable with tools and livestock, took over many of the daily chores. Emma managed the household, cooking and cleaning with the efficiency of someone twice her age. Even the younger children contributed, gathering eggs, hauling water, watching the baby. They were a family, forged by necessity into something stronger than blood. One evening, as Thomas and Samuel were mending fence, the boy asked a question that had clearly been weighing on him. "Pa, why doesn't someone just shoot Dalton?" Thomas stopped working, set down his hammer, "Because murder is wrong, no matter how much someone deserves it. But he's trying to kill us, slowly. Doesn't that make it self-defense?" "The law doesn't see it that way, and more importantly, I don't see it that way." Thomas looked at the boy. "Samuel, violence is easy. Any fool can pull a trigger. But living right, fighting fair, winning without becoming the thing you hate, that's hard. That's what separates men from animals. But what if he wins? What if we lose everything because we fought fair and he didn't? Then we lose knowing we did right, and that matters more than land or money or pride." Samuel was quiet for a moment. "I don't know if I believe that." "You will when you're older, when you have children of your own. You'll understand that what you teach them by example matters more than what you leave them in inheritance." They finished the fence in silence, but Thomas saw Samuel thinking, processing, learning the lessons that could not be taught, only shown. That night, Thomas sat at the kitchen table writing letters. One to the Territorial Land Office, formally documenting Dalton's cattle trespass and requesting compensation. Another to the county sheriff reporting the barn fire and cattle poisoning as criminal acts requiring investigation. He was sealing the letters when someone knocked on the door. Thomas grabbed the rifle, moved to the window, saw 3 horses outside, 3 men. His hand tightened on the rifle. If this was Dalton's men, if they had come for violence, he would give it to them. But the voice that called out was familiar. "Thomas Wade, it's Henrik Larson. I've got Jack Sullivan and Michael O'Brien with me. We need to talk." Thomas opened the door cautiously. The 3 men stood in the snow, hats in hands, looking nervous. "Come in." They filed inside. Sarah brought coffee. The children watched from the bed with wide eyes. Henrik spoke first. He was a big man, Norwegian, with hands like mallets and a face weathered by 30 years farming hard ground. "We heard about your cattle, about the fire before that. Doc Morrison told us you're gathering evidence against Dalton." "I am. We want to help." Thomas studied them. "Help how?" Jack Sullivan, a lean Texan who ran cattle on the eastern edge of the valley, spoke up. "We'll testify about what Dalton did to us, about his methods. We'll stand with you. Dalton will retaliate. He's already retaliating. We're all barely hanging on. Another year of his pressure, and we'll be finished anyway." Henrik's voice was grim. "At least this way we fight back." Michael O'Brien, an Irish immigrant who owned a small ranch north of town, nodded. "We've talked to others, Catherine Mills, the Chen family, even Reverend Carter. They're all willing to sign statements, to testify if it comes to that." Thomas felt something shift in his chest. Hope. Real hope. "Why now? Why come forward now?" Henrik smiled. Because you won the custody fight. Because you beat Caleb Harmon in court with nothing but truth and guts. You showed us it's possible. And because your wife is pregnant, Jack added. Catherine Mills mentioned it, said she saw Sarah in town last week. A man fighting for his pregnant wife and 7 kids, that's a man worth following. Thomas glanced at Sarah. She looked surprised. Apparently her loose dresses had not hidden as much as she thought. What do you need from us? Henrik asked. Written statements, dates, details, everything you can remember about what Dalton did to you. You'll have them within the week. They shook hands. The 3 men left. Thomas stood at the window watching them ride away, feeling the weight of responsibility grow heavier. He was not just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for all of them, for everyone Dalton had crushed or tried to crush. If he failed, he would take them down with him. If he succeeded, he would change everything. No pressure, Sarah said softly, coming to stand beside him. Thomas laughed, a short, bitter sound. None at all. But that night as he lay in bed beside Sarah, her hand resting on her growing belly, Thomas felt something he had not felt since Margaret died. Purpose beyond survival. A cause worth fighting for. A future worth building. The statements arrived over the next 2 weeks. Handwritten pages, some barely literate, others eloquent. All damning. Doc Morrison compiled them into a formal complaint, added his medical evidence about the poisoned cattle, attached property maps showing how Dalton had systematically acquired land through intimidation and fraud. This is good, Doc said, reviewing the final document. This is actionable, but you need to file it in the territorial capital. Sterling is too close to Dalton's influence. That's a week's ride. Then you better get started. Thomas looked at Sarah. She was 6 months pregnant now, showing clearly, tired but determined. I can't leave you that long. Not with Dalton still out there. You have to. This is our chance. Sarah gripped his hand. Henrik and Jack will check on us. Sheriff Cooper knows to watch the house. We'll be fine. Sarah, go. Finish this, so our child can be born into a world where Dalton doesn't control everything. Thomas left 2 days later. He carried the complaint documents in a waterproof case, rode hard, stayed in cheap boarding houses, spent money he did not have on filing fees and certified copies. The clerk at the Territorial Land Office read the complaint with increasing interest. This is serious. If even half of this is true, Mr. Dalton has violated multiple territorial statutes. It's all true. I have witnesses ready to testify. The territory will need to investigate. Send a marshal. Could take months. How many months? 3, maybe 4. These things move slowly. Thomas felt frustration rise. In 4 months, Dalton could destroy a dozen more families. I understand, but the law has processes. We can't circumvent them just because we're impatient. Thomas rode home angry and disappointed. 8 days of hard travel, money spent. For what? A promise of investigation that might never happen. But when he arrived at the cabin, he found Sarah on the porch with a smile he had not seen in months. What happened? Reverend Carter came by, said the church council met. They voted to officially censure Dalton. No more donations, no more support, nothing until he makes amends for his behavior. That's significant. Dalton's wife is very devout and very proud. Being cut off from the church will humiliate her. She'll pressure him to back down. Thomas dismounted, hugged Sarah carefully, mindful of her belly. It's a start. It's more than a start. It's the community choosing sides. And they chose us. Over the next month, things began to shift. Small change, subtle realignments of power. The bank which had refused Thomas credit suddenly approved a small loan. Not much, but enough to buy lumber for a proper barn. The general store started extending credit to families Dalton had blacklisted. At church, people who had avoided Thomas and Sarah began speaking to them, offering help, sharing food. Dalton noticed. Thomas could see it in the man's face when they passed on the street. The anger, the calculation. This was not over. Would not be over until one of them broke completely. The break came in late July. Thomas was working on the new barn hammer in hand when he saw riders approaching. 6 men, Dalton in the lead. Thomas set down the hammer, walked to meet them, unarmed but unafraid. Samuel appeared at his side. Pay. Get your mother. Tell her to keep the children inside. Lock the door. Samuel ran. Thomas stood alone watching 6 armed men ride onto his property. Dalton dismounted. His face was cold fury. You've caused me considerable trouble, Wade. Good. The territorial marshal visited me last week, asked questions, demanded I account for land acquisitions going back 5 years. And could you buy my... Oh, that's not the point. The point is you're interfering in business that's none of your concern. You made it my concern when you burned my barn, poisoned my cattle. I have no idea what you're talking about. Of course you don't. You never do. You just benefit when convenient accidents happen to people who oppose you. Dalton stepped closer. I'm going to make you a final offer, Wade. $500 for your land. You take it and leave today, or things get very difficult for you and your family. No. No, that's right. No, I'm not selling. I'm not leaving. And I'm not afraid of you anymore. Dalton's hand moved toward his gun. Thomas did not flinch. You shoot me, you hang. Too many witnesses now. Too many people watching. The old days are over, Dalton. You can't just kill people who inconvenience you. Can I? A voice cut through the tension. Sheriff Cooper riding up with 3 deputized men. Morning, Dalton. Thomas. Everything all right here? Dalton's hand moved away from his gun. Just having a conversation. Looked like more than that. Thomas, you want to file a complaint? No, Mr. Dalton was just leaving. Dalton stared at Thomas for a long moment. Then he smiled. Cold. Dangerous. You think you've won. You haven't. You've just made it personal. He mounted his horse. His men followed. They rode away slowly, deliberately, showing they were not afraid or rushed. Cooper waited until they were out of sight. Then he turned to Thomas. You're playing a dangerous game. I know. Dalton doesn't lose gracefully. When he goes down, he'll try to take you with him. Let him try. But that night, Thomas could not sleep. He lay beside Sarah, listening to her breathe, feeling their child move beneath his hand, and wondered if his pride would cost him everything. The answer came a week later. Thomas was in the fields when he heard Sarah scream. He ran toward the house, fear giving him speed. Inside, Sarah sat on the floor, blood soaking through her dress. The baby, she gasped. Something's wrong. Thomas did not think, just acted. Lifted her, carried her to the wagon, shouted for Samuel to watch the children. The ride to town was the longest of his life. Sarah cried out with every bump. Blood soaked the blankets Thomas had wrapped around her. Hold on, he kept saying. Just hold on. Doc Morrison took one look and cleared his examination table. Thomas, wait outside. No. This is going to be bad. You don't want to see. She's my wife. I'm staying. Doc did not argue further. He worked quickly, efficiently. Years of battlefield surgery had taught him to ignore emotion and focus on the work. Thomas held Sarah's hand, watched her face contort with pain, heard her scream and beg and cry, and felt utterly helpless. After what felt like hours but was probably 30 minutes, Doc stepped back. She's stable, baby's still alive, but she needs complete bed rest, no work, no stress, nothing but rest for the next 2 months. What caused this? Could be anything, bad fall, lifting something heavy, or just bad luck. Some pregnancies are like this. But Thomas knew it was stress, knew it was fear, knew it was months of barely surviving, of constant worry, of sleeping with one eye open, waiting for Dalton's next attack. This was on him. His stubborn refusal to yield had nearly cost Sarah and their child their lives. Doc must have seen it on his face. This is not your fault, Thomas. Isn't it? No, it's Dalton's. He created the conditions. He applied the pressure. You just refused to break. Doc gripped Thomas's shoulder. Don't let him win by blaming yourself. That's what he wants. He wants you broken. Don't give him the satisfaction. Thomas nodded, but the guilt remained. Sarah was moved to a bed in Doc's back room. She would stay there until the baby came. Thomas sat beside her, holding her hand. I'm sorry, he said. For what? For being stubborn, for not selling when I had the chance, for putting you through this. Sarah squeezed his hand weakly. Thomas, Wade, you listen to me. We did not come this far to give up now. We've lost before. We've buried children before. We know that pain, but we also know something else. We know how to survive, how to fight, how to keep going when everything says stop. She pulled his hand to her belly. He felt the baby move, strong, alive. This child is going to be born free, on land we own, in a house we built, surrounded by family. Not in some rented room in a city where Dalton's money controls everything. Here, our home. What if we lose? What if he takes everything? Then we rebuild, again, like we always have. Sarah's eyes were fierce. But we don't give up. We don't surrender. We fight until we win or until we're dead. Those are the only two options. Thomas leaned down, kissed her forehead. Yes, ma'am. He stayed with Sarah through the night. In the morning, Sheriff Cooper brought news. The territorial marshal issued arrest warrants for Dalton and 3 of his men. Charges include arson, destruction of property, cattle rustling, and conspiracy to defraud. Thomas felt his heart leap. He's arrested? Not yet. Dalton saw it coming. Disappeared 3 days ago. Took his family and his money. Some say he went to California. Others think Mexico. So he's gone. Looks like it. The bank seized his ranch this morning. He left debts all over the territory. Turned out most of his wealth was leverage and fraud. When it collapsed, it took everything with it. Thomas sat back, stunned. He had prepared for years of legal battles, for violence, for everything except this. Dalton had simply run. What about his men? 2 arrested, 1 still missing. But without Dalton, they're just hired guns with no employer. They'll scatter. Cooper paused. You won, Thomas? You beat him. Thomas had almost forgotten about them in the chaos. Yes, they're still there. They're yours now, under the counter notification you filed and with Dalton having abandoned them for over 10 days. The land office confirmed it this morning. Consider them compensation for your losses. Thomas felt something loosen in his chest. 12 head of cattle, not full compensation for everything he'd lost, but enough to rebuild. Enough to survive. Thank you, Sheriff. Cooper smiled. You won, Thomas. You beat him. I didn't do anything. The law did. You gathered the evidence. You stood up when no one else would. You showed people it was possible to fight. Cooper smiled. You won. Accept it. After Cooper left, Thomas sat with Sarah and told her. She cried. Not from sadness, from relief so profound it had to escape somehow. It's over, she whispered. It's over. They held each other, 2 broken people who had found strength in each other, who had survived winter and fire and poison and fear, who had won. Not through violence, not through revenge, but through patient, relentless, grinding determination to simply refuse to quit. Sarah stayed in Doc Morrison's care for 6 more weeks. Thomas visited every day, brought the children on Sundays. They would crowd around the bed telling their mother about the new barn Thomas was building, about the garden Emma was tending, about the new foal Belle had birthed. And Sarah would listen and smile and slowly, gradually regain her strength. On a warm afternoon in early September, Doc Morrison came to find Thomas. It's time, baby's coming. Thomas rode to town faster than was probably safe. Tied Duke with trembling hands. Ran inside. Sarah was in labor. Real labor this time. Strong and healthy and progressing normally. You want to stay? Doc asked. Yes. Even though last time was hard. Especially because last time was hard. I won't miss this. So Thomas stayed, held Sarah's hand, wiped her forehead, whispered encouragement during contractions. And when the baby finally came, when that first cry split the air, Thomas wept. A girl, perfect and whole and alive. Doc wrapped the baby and handed her to Sarah. Then he did something unusual. He left, gave them privacy. Sarah held the baby close, studied her tiny face. What should we name her? Thomas thought about the past year, about everything they had survived, everything they had lost, everything they had gained. Hope, he said. Her name is Hope. Sarah smiled. Hope Wade. It's perfect. The baby nursed. Sarah dozed. Thomas sat in a chair beside the bed watching his wife and daughter sleep. He thought about Margaret and Rose, about the family he had lost, about the pain of those deaths and how he thought he would never recover. He had not recovered, would never fully recover. The scars remained, but he had learned something, that scars did not prevent healing. That loss did not mean the end of love, that you could carry grief and joy simultaneously and neither diminish the other. He had a new family now, a wife who was fierce and brave and stubborn, 7 children who looked to him for guidance and protection, a home that was small and simple but filled with more life than the grandest mansion. This was not the life he had planned, was nothing like what he thought he wanted. But it was good, it was real, it was his. Doc Morrison came back after an hour. You can bring them home tomorrow. Sarah and Hope both. Thank you, Doc, for everything. I didn't do much. You two did the hard part. You stood with us when no one else would. That counts. Doc nodded, accepted the gratitude with quiet grace. Thomas rode home through the golden late summer afternoon. The fields were ready for harvest. The new barn stood complete, larger and better built than the old one. The cabin had a new roof and fresh chinking between the logs. The children rushed out when they heard the horse. Is the baby here? Is Ma all right? What's the baby's name? Thomas answered all their questions. Then he told them they would bring Sarah and Hope home tomorrow. That they needed to prepare. Emma and Samuel immediately began organizing. The younger children cleaned with enthusiasm, if not skill. By evening, the cabin was as presentable as it had ever been. That night, Thomas sat on the porch with Samuel. The boy was nearly 12 now, taller, stronger, more confident. Pa, can I ask you something? Always. Do you think about your other family, the one that died? Thomas was quiet for a moment. Every day. Does it hurt? Yes, but not like it used to. The pain has changed. It's softer now, more like an ache than a wound. Do you think they'd be mad that you have a new family? Thomas put his arm around the boy. No, I think they'd be glad. Margaret always said love multiplies. It doesn't divide. Having a new family doesn't mean I love her or Rose less. It means I have more love to give. Samuel nodded, leaned against Thomas's shoulder. I'm glad you found us. Me too, son, me too. The next day, Thomas brought Sarah and Hope home. The children crowded around, wanting to hold the baby, to touch her tiny hands, to marvel at her existence. Hope slept through all the attention, peaceful and content. That night, after the children were asleep, Sarah and Thomas sat together, Hope in her mother's arms. We did it, Sarah said softly. We survived. We did more than survive. We built something. What did we build? Thomas looked around the cabin, at the sleeping children, at his wife and newborn daughter, at this collection of people who were not bound by blood, but by choice and commitment and shared struggle. A family, he said. We built a family. Sarah smiled. Yes, we did. 5 years passed. The cabin was expanded. 2 more rooms, space for everyone. The farm grew, more land, more livestock, enough to provide comfortable living, if not wealth. Samuel, now 17, managed much of the daily work. He was courting a girl from town, talking about marriage, about building his own cabin on the north section of Thomas's land. Emma was 15, beautiful and smart and determined to become a teacher like her mother had been. The twins Lucy and Lily were 10, inseparable as ever. Daniel was 12, quiet but strong, good with his hands. Grace was 6. The child who had nearly died was now healthy and energetic, always laughing. And Hope, 5 years old, with Thomas's dark hair and Sarah's fierce eyes. The child born from struggle, the living reminder of what they had survived. Thomas stood on the porch one evening watching the sun set over his fields. 40 years old now, gray threading through his hair, lines on his face, but content in a way he had never expected to be. Sarah came to stand beside him, 32 years old, still beautiful, still strong. What are you thinking, she asked. That I'm grateful for all of it, even the hard parts, because they led here. Any regrets? Thomas thought about that. I regret not saving Margaret and Rose. I'll always regret that. But I don't regret what came after. I don't regret you. I don't regret this life. Sarah took his hand. Do you remember what you said that first day when you found me in the snow? I said a lot of things. You said you couldn't watch another family die when you had the means to prevent it. I remember. You didn't just prevent it. You built it. You gave us a home, a future, a life worth living. Sarah squeezed his hand. You saved us, Thomas Wade. We saved each other. They stood together watching the light fade from the sky. Behind them through the cabin window, they could hear the children arguing about whose turn it was to set the table. Ordinary sounds of an ordinary family living an ordinary life. But there was nothing ordinary about it. Not really. They had fought for this, bled for it, nearly died for it. And they had won. Not glory, not wealth, not fame. Something better. They had won the right to be together, to build a life, to pass something good and true to the next generation. Thomas Wade had come to Nebraska 3 years ago running from ghosts. He had thought he was dead inside, thought love and family were things of his past, never to be reclaimed. He had been wrong. You could lose everything and still rebuild, could be broken and still heal, could carry grief and still find joy. All it took was courage, persistence, and the willingness to let others in when every instinct said to keep them out. Thomas had learned that lesson in the hardest way possible, but he had learned it. And on this warm autumn evening, standing beside the woman he loved, hearing the sounds of children he had chosen and who had chosen him, Thomas Wade finally understood what his father had been trying to teach him 30 years ago. Legacy was not what you owned, it was what you gave, not in death but in life. Every day, through every action and choice and sacrifice. His legacy would be these children, the values he taught them, the example he set, the life he had built from ashes and desperation and stubborn refusal to quit. That was enough, more than enough. It was everything. As the last light faded and the first stars appeared, Thomas turned toward the cabin, toward the warmth and noise and beautiful chaos of family. Sarah followed, but at the door she paused. Thomas, yes, thank you. For what? For stopping that day, for not riding past, for being the kind of man who helps even when it's hard. Thomas pulled her close, kissed her forehead. You're welcome, but I didn't do it just for you. I did it for me too, because helping you saved me just as much as it saved you. They went inside together, closed the door against the night, and somewhere in the darkness the wind whispered through the cottonwoods, carrying with it the promise of winter, of cold and hardship and struggle, but also of survival, of family, of hope. The last winter had been survived, and spring would come again. It always did.